Stephen Kubacki, 15 Months of Vanished Time. In the winter of 1978, Stephen Kubacki, a bright and adventurous student from Hope College, set out on what should have been a simple, invigorating cross-country skiing trip. It was late February in the American Midwest, and the frigid landscape, still locked in ice and snow, beckoned to outdoor enthusiasts like Kubacki. He was no amateur in the wild. Having scaled European peaks and earned a reputation among his peers as a seasoned outdoorsman, his decision to spend a solitary day skiing near Lake Michigan did not raise any alarms. But what followed would go on to become one of the most perplexing missing persons cases in modern American history. One with no clear answers, and one that challenges the boundaries of our understanding of time, memory, and perhaps even reality itself. Several days after Kubacki failed to return, concern quickly escalated. He had not informed anyone of an extended plan, and this was supposed to be a routine day trip. The situation took a bizarre turn when snowmobilers discovered a pair of abandoned skis and poles on the southeastern shore of Lake Michigan. The local authorities swiftly identified them as belonging to Kubacki. A full-scale search was launched involving helicopters, ground teams, and local volunteers. All that was found, however, was Kubacki's backpack curiously tossed aside in a trail of footprints that led out onto the frozen lake, and then vanished. The impressions simply stopped with no sign of struggle, injury, or direction. It was as though the young man had walked out of the world itself. Faced with no tangible evidence, the police defaulted to a logical, albeit tragic conclusion. Stephen must have removed his skis and wandered onto unsafe ice, where he likely fell through and drowned. Though his body was never recovered, the theory placated official channels. His friends grieved, his family mourned, and life reluctantly moved on. But then, more than a year later, the impossible happened. On May 5, 1979, 15 months after he had disappeared, Stephen Kubacki walked through the front door of his parents' house over 700 miles away in Massachusetts. His story was as chilling as it was surreal. Kubacki said the last thing he remembered was skiing along Lake Michigan before experiencing a sudden blackout, a brief moment of frozen darkness. The next thing he knew, he was waking up in a grassy field in Pittsfield, Massachusetts. He was wearing clothes that were not his own, carrying a backpack with maps and items he did not recognize. It was only when he purchased a newspaper that he realized over a year had passed. He had no idea how he had gotten there, where he had been, or what had occurred during that time. To this day, the case remains unresolved. While some suggest dissociative fugue or psychological breakdown, others believe his story hints at something far stranger. The area where he vanished is linked with other mysterious disappearances, often dubbed the Lake Michigan Triangle. The notion that Kubacki might have somehow crossed into another dimension, timeline, or altered state of being continues to spark debate. Regardless of the cause, Stephen Kubacki's 15-month disappearance remains one of the most haunting and enigmatic stories in modern history, a chilling testament to how thin the veil of reality may truly be. Amy Lynn Bradley, lost at sea or sold into silence. In March 1998, what began as a joyful family cruise aboard Royal Caribbean's Rhapsody of the Seas soon spiraled into an enduring nightmare for the Bradley family. Amy Lynn Bradley, a vibrant 23-year-old woman from Virginia, disappeared under mysterious and deeply disturbing circumstances. Accompanied by her parents, Ron and Iva, and younger brother Brad, the family boarded the ship in Aruba, ready for a relaxing vacation. But just 3 days into the voyage, Amy vanished, and more than 2 decades later, no one knows where she went or what really happened that night. What makes Amy's case especially chilling is not just her sudden disappearance, but the persistent clues and sightings that suggest she may have been kidnapped and forced into a hidden world. Few dare to imagine international human trafficking. On the night of March 23rd, Amy was seen enjoying herself in the ship's nightclub, dancing with several members of the ship's band, most notably Alistair Yellow Douglas. Around 1 a.m., Amy reportedly left the club to return to her cabin. Around 5:30 a.m., her father briefly woke and saw Amy sleeping on the balcony of their shared cabin. But by 6 a.m., she was gone. The family instantly raised the alarm, but their pleas to the ship's crew to halt disembarkation at the next port, Curaçao, were ignored. Hundreds of passengers streamed off the ship, and with them perhaps Amy herself or those responsible for her disappearance. The ship was searched both above and below deck, but there was no sign of Amy. There was no evidence of suicide, no signs she had fallen overboard, and nothing to suggest she had simply left of her own accord. Amy was a trained lifeguard, an excellent swimmer, and was known to be extremely close with her family. The idea that she would voluntarily vanish without contacting them has always seemed implausible. What followed only deepened the mystery and ignited a terrifying possibility. In 1999, a U.S. Navy officer claimed he had seen Amy in a Curaçao brothel where she approached him in desperation, telling him her name and begging for help before being pulled away by 2 men. In 2005, another woman, July Mora, reported a chance encounter in a restroom with a distraught woman claiming to be Amy Bradley from Virginia, who was accompanied by intimidating men who issued threats. Adding to the heartbreak, Amy's parents later received disturbing photographs via email showing a scantily clad woman resembling their daughter who appeared to be posing in a sexually explicit context. Experts have debated the legitimacy of the images, but the resemblance is haunting. Despite these sightings and chilling clues, Amy's whereabouts remain unknown. The Bradley family has never stopped searching. They continue to offer a $251 reward for credible information leading to her recovery. Her case has been featured in countless documentaries, television specials, and podcasts, and yet every lead seems to vanish like smoke. Many believe Amy was abducted, possibly by someone on board the ship, and sold into a human trafficking ring operating in the Caribbean. The fact that security was lax, passengers disembarked freely, and the cruise line delayed critical action only fuels this theory. Others, including some investigators, have suggested she may have been stalked prior to the cruise, noting that multiple crew members had reportedly shown a suspicious interest in her. In the end, Amy Lynn Bradley's story is not just a personal tragedy, but a symbol of the dangers that can lurk behind moments of leisure and celebration. Her disappearance exposes how even in the most public, seemingly secure environments, individuals, particularly women, can fall prey to networks operating in the shadows. As the years go by, one haunting question remains: is Amy still alive, waiting for someone to find her? Derek J. Luking, Don't Follow Me, and The Vanishing in the Woods. On the morning of March 15, 2012, Derek J. Luking failed to show up for work, an uncharacteristic move for the 24-year-old Tennessee Health Center employee. What began as a simple case of absenteeism would quickly morph into one of the most perplexing and emotionally charged missing person cases in the southeastern United States. Derek was known for his gentle nature, his servant's heart, and his consistent behavior. So when his family realized he hadn't contacted anyone and hadn't appeared for his job at Peninsula Behavioral Health Center, alarm bells began ringing. The series of clues he left behind would only deepen the mystery and raise questions that continue to haunt investigators and loved ones to this day. Derek had grown up in Virginia and later moved to Knoxville, Tennessee for college, attending Johnson University before landing a position at a mental health facility. According to those who knew him best, he had recently seemed a bit unsettled, drinking occasionally, smoking, and expressing dissatisfaction with where he was in life. However, no one believed he was depressed or suicidal. In fact, he seemed to be preparing for something. Searches of his computer revealed he had been looking into hiking routes in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park and had booked a hotel room in Cherokee, North Carolina. Security footage from that hotel shows him leaving his room on March 17th, just 2 days after failing to appear at work. Inside the room, investigators found a Bible and a bottle of alcohol, but Derek himself was gone. The trail eventually led to the Newfound Gap parking area, located along the border between Tennessee and North Carolina, a stunning but remote section of the national park. There, his family made a chilling discovery: Derek's Ford Escape SUV abandoned. The vehicle was packed with nearly $1,000 worth of outdoor survival gear. It was evident that he had come prepared for a prolonged hike or wilderness stay. Inside the car were a sleeping bag tent pickaxe, 100 feet of parachute cord, granola bars, a multi-tool fire starter pocket knife, maps, and even pages torn from a military survival manual. His wallet, filled with cash, remained untouched. But perhaps the most ominous discovery was a handwritten note. "Don't try to follow me." This short but chilling message left both family and authorities reeling. Did Derek intend to disappear forever? Was this a planned retreat from society, a symbolic gesture, or something more troubling? His family was adamant that Derek would not have taken his own life, nor would he have vanished without a word unless under immense psychological or spiritual pressure. Search teams combed the area. Despite perfect hiking weather and a bustling park that weekend, no one remembered seeing Derek. Extensive search operations aided by volunteers, dogs and helicopters, yielded no signs, no broken branches, discarded gear, or footprints beyond the parking area. It was as if he had vanished into thin air. Some believe Derek wandered off the trail intentionally, perhaps, to seek solitude or undergo some personal transformation. Others suggest he may have suffered a mental health crisis or spiritual experience given the items he brought and left behind. The meticulous preparation of gear contrasts starkly with the fact that none of it was taken onto the trail. Why spend hundreds of dollars and leave everything behind? Years later, no trace of Derek J. Luking has ever been recovered. His family continues to hold out hope, clinging to the idea that he may still be out there living in isolation or recovering from something no one else can comprehend. His story remains an unsolved enigma caught between the possibility of a voluntary disappearance and something far darker. "Don't follow me," he wrote. But in doing so, he ensured that countless people never stopped looking. Maurice Gordon, Doc DeMett's Disappearance in Thin Air. In the serene wilderness of Colorado's Pike National Forest, the earth seems to hold centuries of silence and secrets beneath its ancient pines. But on April 29, 1981, that silence was shattered not by a scream or an accident, but by the inexplicable vanishing of a man who by all accounts had every reason to be where he was and none to disappear. Maurice Gordon, Doc Demetz, a retired seminary professor and devout Christian, vanished without a trace while rock hunting with a younger companion. What makes his case uniquely haunting is not just the setting a bright day in a familiar location just minutes away from help, but the bizarre and eerie circumstances under which he vanished. It remains one of the most baffling unsolved disappearances in Colorado history. Doc Demetz, 84 years old at the time, was not just a frail elderly man. Despite suffering from severe arthritis and requiring assistance to walk on uneven ground, he was mentally sharp, spiritually vibrant, and deeply passionate about geology, particularly the search for topaz and other semi-precious stones in the area around Rampart Range. He had been to this particular spot near Devil's Head many times before. On that fateful morning, he and his young friend David McSherry arrived at the site by car. Because of his mobility issues, Demetz had to be helped to his usual digging spot, roughly 150 feet from where McSherry planned to search. After ensuring Demetz was comfortably seated with his tools and gear, McSherry walked out of sight. They had agreed to reconvene in about 45 minutes. But when McSherry returned, just as planned, Demetz was gone. No sound had been heard, no struggle noticed. His tools were exactly where he left them. There were no drag marks, no signs of animal activity, and the terrain was not difficult enough for him to simply vanish over a ridge or into a crevice. He could barely walk unaided. Yet in broad daylight on clear ground, he was gone. Panic quickly set in. McSherry searched the area, calling out, retracing every step. Within hours, a full-scale search was launched. Over the following days, search and rescue teams combed the region with dogs, helicopters, and hundreds of volunteers. Nothing, no torn clothing, no footprints, no scent trail. It was as if the earth itself had swallowed Doc Demetz whole. Authorities were baffled. There was no reason to suspect foul play. McSherry passed polygraphs and was known to be a trusted family friend. There was also no sign of an animal attack, and Demetz's physical limitations made it implausible he had simply wandered off into the forest. In the absence of evidence, theories began to swirl, some rationale, some reaching into the unknown. Could Demetz have suffered a medical event and somehow moved from the spot before collapsing out of sight? Unlikely. Could he have been taken by whom and how in daylight so close to a companion? Others wondered if he had been the victim of some strange natural phenomenon, a hidden sinkhole, an undiscovered mine shaft, or even an electromagnetic event that rendered him disoriented or affected. Still, no physical evidence was ever found. Then there are the more otherworldly suggestions, whispers of portals, dimensional shifts and unexplained disappearances tied to certain window areas of high strangeness in North America. Pike National Forest has seen its share of missing persons and strange encounters, leading some to believe Doc Demetz may have encountered something science cannot yet explain. For his family and community, the heartbreak lingers. Demetz's faith was deep and sincere, and those who knew him often point out that he would have been prepared to meet his Maker. But the mystery of how, where, and why he vanished continues to raise eyebrows and questions. How does a man disappear in plain sight, leaving not a single trace? For some, his story is a chilling reminder that even the most ordinary days can end in unfathomable mystery. James Tedford, the man who disappeared on a bus. Of all the mysterious disappearances on record, few defy explanations chillingly and completely as that of James Tedford, a World War II veteran and resident of the Bennington Soldiers' Home in Vermont. His vanishing is not just strange, it's nearly supernatural. Tedford vanished without a trace while aboard a moving bus surrounded by passengers en route to his destination. There were no stops in between, no opportunities to slip away unnoticed. He simply ceased to exist mid-journey. His disappearance remains one of the most baffling in American history, a case that haunts the lore of the infamous Bennington Triangle. The date was December 1st, 1949. Tedford had been visiting relatives in St. Albans, Vermont, and was returning home by bus to Bennington, a 90-mile journey that should have taken less than 3 hours. He was seen boarding the bus and was reportedly present and accounted for during multiple stops along the way. Witnesses confirmed seeing him sitting quietly reading a flyer or gazing out the window. But when the bus arrived at its final stop, the Bennington Soldiers' Home, Tedford was gone, not missing from the station, missing from his seat. His belongings were still on board a suitcase, a folded timetable, and even the open bus schedule he had been reading. But Tedford himself vanished as if plucked from existence. The driver and other passengers were stunned. They insisted he had been on the bus at the previous stop just minutes before arrival. No one had seen him disembark. No one had seen or heard anything suspicious. He hadn't left the seat, and there was no indication of illness or distress. Authorities investigated, but there were no signs of foul play. No body was ever found. The route taken by the bus passed through mostly rural terrain, and the windows were closed on that chilly December evening. There were no breaks long enough for a person to exit and vanish undetected. The only certainty was this: James Tedford had entered the bus, and he had not left it, at least not in any conventional sense. His disappearance is one of the most famous in the cluster of strange events that make up the legend of the Bennington Triangle, a region in southwestern Vermont known for a string of unexplained vanishings between 1945 and 1950. In fact, Tedford was not the first nor the last to vanish mysteriously in this area. Hikers, students, and even an experienced hunter disappeared within a narrow geographical radius during that 5-year period, often in daylight and with no witnesses. Some link the area to ancient Native American lore. Others suggest geological anomalies, magnetic disturbances, or even interdimensional rifts. As for Tedford, the possibilities are few and all unsatisfying. Did he suffer a sudden mental break and leap from the moving bus, only to vanish without a trace in the winter woods? Did he fall victim to some unknown force, one that operates on rules we do not yet understand? Or did something even stranger happen, something that defies language and logic alike? To this day, no evidence of Tedford's fate has ever surfaced. The only things that remain are his empty seat, his untouched belongings, and a line of confused and unnerved witnesses who swear he was there until he wasn't. His story has become a grim symbol of the unknown, a reminder that even in a world governed by reason and routine, some vanishings still refuse explanation. Brandon Swanson, The Phone Call into the Darkness. On the night of May 14, 2008, 19-year-old Brandon Swanson called his parents for help after his car had run off a rural road in western Minnesota. What began as a simple call for assistance spiraled into one of the most chilling and bewildering missing persons cases in modern U.S. history. Brandon's voice was calm, clear, and fully lucid. He wasn't in danger, at least not at first. But then, in the middle of the phone call, his voice dropped to a startled, "Oh shit," and the line went silent. That was the last time anyone ever heard from him. Brandon had been celebrating the end of his spring semester at Minnesota West Community and Technical College in Canby. After leaving a gathering at a friend's house, he attempted to drive home to Marshall, a small town roughly 30 minutes away. But somewhere along the way he missed a turn and ended up stuck in a ditch near the tiny town of Taunton, or so he believed. His car had become lodged on a gravel road, but it wasn't damaged, and he didn't seem injured. At around 1:54 a.m., Brandon called his parents, Brian and Annette, to come pick him up. He told them he would walk toward the lights of a nearby town, and they could meet him on the road. For nearly 47 minutes, Brandon remained on the phone with his father. He sounded slightly frustrated, but not panicked. He was certain he was near Linda Town, just a few miles from home. He described his surroundings, fences, gravel, a stream, and the two stayed on the line trying to guide each other through the night. His father drove up and down the roads. Brandon believed he was walking along flashing headlights and honking the horn, but saw nothing. Then suddenly Brandon stopped mid-sentence and exclaimed, "Oh shit," the line went dead. His phone stayed active for several hours afterward, but he never answered another call or text. When dawn came, there was still no sign of Brandon. His car was located not near Lind, but about 25 miles away near Taunton. It was in a ditch off a gravel road, just as he'd described. The distance between where he thought he was and where he actually was baffled authorities. He had somehow become disoriented, but had spoken clearly and rationally the entire time. A massive search began. Dogs, helicopters, volunteers, and police combed the surrounding fields, creeks, and drainage ditches. Cadaver dogs picked up a scent trail that seemed to follow his likely path past fences, across fields, and toward the Yellow Medicine River. But the scent abruptly stopped near the river bank. No body was found in the water or anywhere nearby. Investigators believe he may have slipped and fallen into the river that night, but extensive searches yielded nothing. His phone never reconnected to a tower after the exclamation, as if it had either been destroyed or turned off. Yet no physical evidence, no clothing, no remains have ever been discovered. Brandon simply vanished. What makes Brandon's case especially unnerving is how ordinary the events leading up to it seemed. There was no indication of drug or alcohol use. He was not emotionally unstable. He wasn't suicidal or fleeing from anything. He was just a teenager who made a wrong turn, asked for help, and vanished mid-sentence. To this day, his disappearance remains unsolved. His parents continue to push for legislation, Brandon's Law, which mandates faster response times for adult missing persons cases in Minnesota. But the deeper question still lingers. How does someone disappear so completely in the age of GPS, cell towers, and modern search technology? While on the phone with a loved one, Brandon Swanson walked into the darkness, and no one has seen him since. The Yuba County Five Madness in the Mountains. In one of the most perplexing and emotionally wrenching missing person cases in American history, 5 men from Yuba City, California, all with mild intellectual disabilities or mental health conditions, vanished on February 24, 1978, after attending a college basketball game. What followed was a tangled mystery of half-discoveries, unanswered questions and a series of eerie clues that seemed to contradict each other at every turn. The case became known as the American Dyatlov Pass, a reference to the infamous disappearance of 9 hikers in Russia, and it remains unsolved to this day. The 5 men, Gary Mathias, 25 Jack Madruga, 30 Bill Sterling, 29 Ted Weiher, 32 and Jack Hewitt, 24, had driven to Chico State University to watch a basketball game. After the game ended, they were seen stopping at a nearby convenience store around 10:00 p.m., where they bought snacks and drinks. Then they seemingly vanished. Their families expected them to return that night as they had an important Special Olympics basketball tournament scheduled the next day. All of them were excited to play, and none had a history of running away or erratic behavior. When they didn't return, families alerted authorities. 4 days later, their car, one 1969 Mercury Montego, owned by Madruga, was found abandoned on a remote mountain road in the Plumas National Forest, far off their expected route home. The car was not stuck or damaged, and it still had a quarter tank of gas. Investigators were puzzled why had they driven over 70 miles into the mountains with no known reason or connection to that area. Even stranger, none of the 5 men had been dressed for the cold. It was February. Snow covered the roads and temperatures at night were below freezing. Yet they had left the car voluntarily and seemingly headed into the wilderness. It wasn't until June, 4 months later, that some answers came. Ted Weiher's body was found inside a U.S. Forest Service trailer nearly 20 miles from the car. His feet were frost-bitten and severely infected, and his beard had grown significantly, suggesting he had survived for 8 to 13 weeks. He had wrapped himself in 8 sheets, but curiously, there was no effort to light the available propane heater. A locker inside the trailer contained enough canned food to last all 5 men for a year, yet most of it was untouched. This baffled investigators. Why didn't they use the resources at their disposal to survive? Soon after the remains of Bill Sterling and Jack Madruga were discovered, about 11 miles from the car, apparently succumbing to exposure. Jack Hewitt's backbone was later found nearby. Only Gary Mathias was never found. A military veteran and diagnosed schizophrenic Mathias had been doing well with medication. His tennis shoes were found in the trailer, suggesting he had either wandered off barefoot or taken someone else's shoes to escape. The strangest element was how methodical their survival seemed at first, and how it abruptly stopped. Weiher's extended survival implied someone had been caring for him at least early on. But why hadn't they used the food turned on the heat or left the area for help? Why had they gone up the mountain at all in the middle of the night in a direction opposite from home? The Yuba County 5 case continues to confound investigators and armchair detectives alike. It is a tangle of contradictions, men who weren't supposed to be capable of such complex movement managing to survive for weeks in the mountains only to die surrounded by everything they needed. No signs of foul play were ever found, yet the eerie details suggest something more than simple misadventure. Was it confusion, fear psychosis, or something else entirely? Chris Kremers and Lisanne Froon, the Lost Girls of Panama. What was supposed to be a joyful adventure abroad turned into one of the most haunting and disturbing disappearances of the 21st century. In March 2014, 2 Dutch students, Chris Kremers, 21, and Lisanne Froon, 22, vanished while hiking in the jungles of Panama. Their disappearance and the harrowing clues left behind has since become a global mystery, marked by eerie photographs, cryptic emergency calls, and a trail of skeletal remains found months later. The case is as heartbreaking as it is baffling, with more questions than answers, and a narrative that leaves room for both logical theories and supernatural speculation. The girls had traveled to Panama for a combination of volunteer work and tourism, arriving in the town of Boquete to begin their journey. On April 1st, they set out on a hike along the popular Pianista Trail. They left behind their host family, their guide, and most of their belongings, taking only a light pack with a camera, 2 phones, some cache water, and snacks. They were never seen alive again. What unfolded next was a prolonged period of silence and confusion. When they failed to show up for a scheduled local tour the next day, alarm bells began to ring. A large-scale search operation ensued involving helicopters, dogs, and indigenous trackers, but days passed with no trace. Then, 10 weeks later, a local woman discovered their backpack on a riverbank, remarkably dry despite recent rainfall. Inside were their belongings, intact and oddly preserved. The phones showed that within hours of beginning their hike, the women had tried to call emergency services over 70 times in total across several days. However, due to poor signal in the jungle, not a single call connected. The contents of the camera offered the most disturbing glimpse into their final days. The initial photos were of a happy, sunny hike. Smiling faces, mountain views, blue skies. Then suddenly, a series of nighttime images began to appear, taken more than a week after their disappearance. Over 90 flash photos were recorded between 1:00 and 4:00 a.m. on April 8th. Most are dark and seemingly random, showing dense foliage, rocks, and eerie close-ups of what appear to be body parts. Some show plastic wrappers or mirrors, possibly used as makeshift SOS signals. One particularly grim photo shows the back of Chris's head with what looks like blood or injury. Weeks later, fragments of their remains were discovered. Lisanne's foot, still in a boot, was found, followed by parts of a pelvis and ribs. DNA confirmed the identities but added little clarity. Some bones showed signs of natural decomposition, while others had been unnaturally bleached. No cause of death could be determined. There were no signs of struggle, but the location of the remains, scattered across difficult terrain, suggested either disorientation, separation, or deliberate placement. Theories ranged from the tragic they got lost, fell and perished, to the sinister they encountered foul play or were stalked and murdered. Some locals believe something darker happened, pointing to the girls' strange final photos, the lack of injuries consistent with falls, and the inconsistent behavior recorded on the phones. Others suspect that at least one girl may have survived for several days alone, trying to navigate back to civilization. The case remains officially unsolved, and the story of Chris and Lisanne continues to stir fear, sadness, and fascination. It is a cruel reminder of how quickly a dream adventure can descend into a nightmare, and how even in our digital age, 2 young women can vanish into the jungle with only fragments of their final hours left behind. Rebecca Corium, The Vanishing, on the Disney Wonder. In March 2011, Rebecca Corium, a 24-year-old British crew member aboard the Disney Wonder cruise ship, disappeared without a trace while the vessel was sailing off the coast of Mexico. Her vanishing sparked international media attention and growing suspicion, not only because of the eerie circumstances surrounding her last known moments, but also because of how tightly Disney seemed to control the narrative that followed. What began as a tragic loss quickly evolved into a chilling mystery steeped in secrecy, corporate power, and unsettling questions. Rebecca was a vibrant, athletic, and deeply loved young woman from Chester, England. She was working as a youth activities coordinator on board the Disney Wonder and had already spent several months sailing with the ship. On the morning of March 22nd, CCTV footage captured Rebecca in a seemingly distressed phone conversation near the crew pool area. She was pacing, wearing men's clothing, notably large pants and flip-flops, and appeared visibly upset. After ending the call, she tucked her hair behind her ear, glanced around, and walked away. She was never seen again. Hours later, when she didn't report for her shift, the crew raised alarms. A full search of the ship was conducted, but there was no sign of her. Rebecca's keycard hadn't been used, and her personal belongings, including her passport, shoes, and neatly folded clothes, remained untouched in her cabin. The ship was in international waters, and Disney, a US-based company, reported the incident to the Bahamian authorities as the Wonder is registered in the Bahamas. However, the investigation that followed has been widely criticized as cursory and shallow. A single Bahamian officer came aboard for a brief superficial inquiry before the ship resumed its itinerary. The official explanation offered by Disney and the authorities was that Rebecca had been swept overboard by a rogue wave near the crew pool area. But many, including her parents, found this explanation implausible. The area in question had high walls and no direct access to the open ocean. Moreover, there was no evidence of rough seas or inclement weather that night. No wave of such size was reported by the crew or passengers, and most tellingly, the exact spot she was last seen is nowhere near the edge of the ship. If she had gone overboard, it's unclear how she could have gotten there. Further complicating the mystery were the actions taken by Disney in the aftermath. The company offered her parents a private meeting aboard the ship, but refused to allow them access to security footage beyond the short clip that had already circulated. Rebecca's family was told repeatedly that the case had been thoroughly investigated, but they were never given a full report. Crew members, many of whom had worked closely with Rebecca, were reportedly instructed not to speak to media. Some hinted at the possibility of foul play, suggesting she may have had conflict with colleagues or been the victim of an onboard assault. Speculation has run wild in the years since. Some believe she suffered a mental breakdown and chose to end her life. Others suspect she was attacked and her disappearance covered up to protect the reputation of one of the world's most family-friendly brands. And still others wonder if she may have attempted to flee, perhaps trying to leave the ship covertly. But with so little transparency and so many closed doors, the truth remains elusive. To this day, Rebecca Coriam's fate remains unknown. Her parents continue to seek answers driven by grief and an unshakable belief that something or someone aboard that ship knows what really happened. Their daughter disappeared on the happiest cruise line on Earth, and what was left behind was a haunting silence, carefully curated statements, and a young woman's smile frozen forever in a corporate frame. Maura Murray, the Internet's favorite missing person case. The disappearance of Maura Murray is one of the most enduring and widely discussed missing person cases in the digital age. On February 9, 2004, the 21-year-old nursing student from the University of Massachusetts Amherst vanished after crashing her car on a remote stretch of Route 112 in Haverhill, New Hampshire. What happened in the moments after the crash and the days leading up to it has sparked countless theories, online sleuthing communities, and even television documentaries. But despite the attention, Maura's fate remains a mystery, and the details surrounding her vanishing continue to provoke confusion, speculation, and sorrow. In the days before her disappearance, Maura's behavior had shifted in strange ways. She emailed her professors saying there had been a death in the family which was not true, and that she would be away for a week. She then packed up some belongings, textbooks, toiletries, and her favorite stuffed animal, and withdrew $280 from an ATM. She also picked up accident report forms for a car crash she had been involved in just days earlier. All of this indicated that she was preparing to go somewhere, but no one knows exactly where or why. That afternoon, Maura drove her Saturn 4 hours north into rural New Hampshire, an area she knew from childhood vacations. At about 7:27 p.m., a local woman called 911 to report seeing Maura's car crashed on the side of the road facing the wrong direction. Another local resident stopped to offer help, but Maura declined, claiming she had already called Tot AAA a lie, as there was no cell service in the area. When police arrived around 7:46 p.m., just minutes later, Maura was gone. Her car was locked and her belongings were still inside, including the printed directions to Vermont and a box of wine, some of which had spilled in the car. There were no footprints in the snow leading away from the scene. Theories about Maura's fate range from the mundane to the sinister. Some believe she staged her disappearance to escape pressure, start a new life, or deal with personal issues in secret. Others suspect foul play, pointing to the isolated crash site and the small window of time between the accident and police arrival. A few even wonder whether she was picked up by a stranger or someone she knew and met with harm. Adding to the enigma are the strange coincidences and lingering clues. Days after her disappearance, her dorm room was found exactly as she had left it, with a packed bag and emails open on her computer. Her cell phone and bank accounts were never used again. Over the years, alleged sightings have been reported, but none verified. Investigators conducted extensive searches of the surrounding woods, rivers, and abandoned properties, yet found nothing definitive. In 2019, authorities dug up a basement near the crash site after receiving a tip, but again, no trace of Maura was discovered. The case gained massive traction online, with Reddit threads, podcasts, and documentaries dissecting every detail. For many, Maura's story tapped into something deeper, a sense of how easily a young woman could disappear without a trace in modern America, and how difficult it is to find closure when the truth lies just beyond reach. Maura Murray remains missing to this day. Her case stands as a haunting symbol of the digital age's intersection with mystery, a story where every answer births more questions, and the search for truth continues pixel by pixel, clue by clue, in the hearts of strangers who never knew her but won't stop looking. The Flannan Isles, mystery, vanishing keepers of the lighthouse. The sea has always carried with it legends of ghosts, disappearances, and eerie whispers in the mist, but few tales are as unsettling and perplexing as the disappearance of 3 lighthouse keepers on the remote Flannan Isles in 1900. Situated off the western coast of Scotland, these rugged, windswept islands were home to a newly built lighthouse and a small team of men tasked with keeping it lit. On December 26th, 1900, when a relief ship arrived to bring supplies and rotate the crew, what they found was a scene as if time had stopped. No welcoming party, no signal flag flying, and no one in sight. The 3 men had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only questions, superstition, and one of the most enduring maritime mysteries in history. The keepers, Thomas Marshall, James Ducat, and Donald MacArthur, had been stationed on the Flannan Isles to manage the lighthouse during the harsh winter. For weeks, their lives followed a strict, isolated routine, maintaining the light, battling the elements, and keeping logs. The last written entry in the lighthouse log, dated December 15th, noted an intense storm, unusual emotional distress among the men, and prayers for deliverance. Odd, considering no storm was reported in the region at that time. Even stranger, the final log entry simply read, "Storm ended, sea calm. God is over all." When the relief crew landed on December 26th, they found the entrance gate closed and locked the beds unmade, and the clock stopped. The lamp had been cleaned and refilled, but no fire had been lit. One oilskin raincoat remained hanging, suggesting at least one of the men had gone outside in harsh weather without protection, a baffling detail in itself. The investigation concluded that the men likely fell victim to a rogue wave while trying to secure equipment near the western landing, but many, even today, doubt this explanation. The landscape of the Flannan Isles adds to the enigma. Steep cliffs drop directly into the raging Atlantic, and it's conceivable that powerful winds or waves could sweep a person away. But for all three men, trained, cautious, and experienced keepers, to vanish simultaneously or consecutively without leaving a single trace seems unlikely. No bodies were ever recovered, no cries heard, no marks on the ground. The mystery gave rise to all manner of speculation. Was it murder, a mutiny? Did they fall victim to madness, sea monsters, or something more supernatural? Over the decades, poets, authors, and conspiracy theorists have kept the tale alive. Wilfred Wilson Gibson penned a haunting poem titled Flannan Isle, painting the men as victims of something otherworldly. Some locals still whisper of curses and ancient spirits said to roam the islands. And yet amidst all the rumors and romanticism, no evidence has ever emerged to offer definitive closure. What makes the Flannan Isles mystery so haunting is its perfect blend of the ordinary and the uncanny. Here were three men performing routine work in a lonely outpost who suddenly vanished from history. No dramatic exit, no final message, just a still burning lamp and an unanswered question hanging in the salty air. A century later, the light may still shine on the Flannan Isles, but the truth behind the keeper's disappearance remains cloaked in maritime shadow. The disappearance of Lars Mittank, Europe's strangest missing tourist case. Among the many baffling modern disappearances, the case of Lars Mittank stands out not only for its strange details, but for the haunting final moments captured on security footage that has made this case a chilling staple of internet mystery forums. Lars Mittank, a healthy 28-year-old German man, vanished without a trace in July 2014 while on vacation in Bulgaria. His sudden erratic behavior and panicked flight from Varna Airport moments before he was supposed to fly home have led to countless theories, but no concrete answers. Lars had been vacationing on the Black Sea coast with friends when things started to go wrong. After a night out in Golden Sands, he got into a physical altercation, allegedly with football fans, which resulted in a ruptured eardrum. A local doctor advised him not to fly for medical reasons and prescribed an antibiotic called ceftriaxone. While his friends returned to Germany as planned, Lars stayed behind alone to recover and rebook his flight. He checked into a cheap hotel near the airport, and it was there that his behavior became increasingly strange. In a series of phone calls to his mother, Lars claimed he was being followed and that he didn't feel safe. He asked her to cancel his credit cards and said he was hiding from men who were out to get him, though he gave no clear reason why. Surveillance footage from the hotel shows him acting nervously, pacing the hallways, peering out of windows, and even leaving the building for the night, only to return in the morning. Despite his increasing paranoia, Lars went to Varna Airport the next day, seemingly ready to fly home. But what happened next is the most chilling part of the story. After arriving at the airport and speaking with an airport doctor about his ear injury, Lars suddenly leapt to his feet, left all his luggage behind, and bolted out of the medical office. Surveillance cameras captured him sprinting out of the airport terminal, dashing across the parking lot, scaling a fence, and disappearing into a nearby forest. He has never been seen or heard from since. Theories abound. Some suggest Lars had a psychotic break possibly induced by antibiotics or a reaction to a head injury sustained in the fight. Others believe he was genuinely being followed, possibly tied to drug trafficking, organ harvesting, or espionage, though these ideas remain speculative. Some claim he may have voluntarily disappeared seeking a new identity or life in hiding. But why leave everything behind, including his passport, wallet, and phone? Lars Mittank's case has sparked widespread fascination because it touches on so many primal fears, the idea of losing one's mind, being hunted, or vanishing in plain sight. The security footage of him sprinting out of the airport looking visibly terrified has been viewed millions of times and only deepens the mystery. He doesn't look like a man faking fear. He looks like someone running for his life. Despite years of investigation, global attention, and numerous reported sightings, Lars has never been found. His mother continues to search, driven by a mother's hope and a haunting absence. Was it mental illness, foul play, or something else entirely? The disappearance of Lars Mittank remains one of Europe's most chilling unsolved mysteries, a modern-day vanishing that began as a vacation and ended in silence. The Sodder children, the fire that didn't consume the truth. On Christmas Eve, 1945, a house fire in Fayetteville, West Virginia would ignite not only a building but decades of unanswered questions, sorrow, and one of America's most haunting family mysteries. George and Jenny Sodder escaped the blaze with 4 of their 10 children, but 5 of their kids, Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jenny Jr., and Betty, were never found. What began as a tragic accident soon evolved into something far more perplexing, a case that challenged the very nature of lost survival and the relentless pursuit of truth in the face of official denial. The Sodder home went up in flames shortly after midnight. George and Jenny managed to flee with 4 of their children, and George attempted to rescue the rest, but his efforts were mysteriously thwarted. His ladder, which he always kept near the house, had vanished. His trucks, which he hoped to use to climb to the upper windows, wouldn't start. There was no time and no way in. By dawn, the home had burned to the ground. But what came next shook the entire town. Despite a thorough search of the ashes, there were no bones, no remains, no sign that the 5 missing children had perished in the fire. Authorities insisted the children had died in the blaze and that the fire had been hot enough to cremate their bodies completely. But this explanation made little scientific sense. Experts later pointed out that even in house fires, some bone fragments or teeth usually remain. Jenny Sodder even conducted her own experiments, burning animal bones in her stove, and found they never disintegrated entirely. Adding to the mystery, The family received a series of suspicious phone calls that night. The power line appeared to have been cut, not burned, and a strange object, possibly a napalm-like incendiary device, was found on the grounds later. Over the years, the Sodders pursued every lead, no matter how remote. A photo was mailed to them in the 1960s, showing a young man who resembled Louis Sodder as he might have looked as an adult. The back bore cryptic writing suggesting he was alive in Italy. Private investigators were hired. Billboards were erected with George and Jenny spending their lives begging for answers, posting signs across highways that read, "What was the fate of our missing children?" Theories flourished. Some believed the children had been kidnapped, possibly by the mafia, in retaliation for George's outspoken anti-Mussolini views. Others thought it was a case of child trafficking or even a cover-up involving local authorities. A witness claimed to have seen the children peering out from a car as the house burned. Another said they were taken to a convent. With each passing year, the story became both more famous and more tragic as the Sodders aged without resolution. The family never stopped believing their children were alive. George died in 1969, Jenny in 1989, never having accepted the official account. The case remains open, but no definitive evidence has emerged. What began as a fire became a symbol of unanswered grief, a mystery fueled by inconsistencies, omissions, and the unwavering love of parents who refuse to let time bury the truth. To this day, the disappearance of the Sodder children haunts West Virginia folklore and true crime circles alike. Was it a tragic accident, a perfect crime, or a heartbreaking mixture of both? The flames may have died, but the questions still burn. The disappearance of Ambrose Bierce. The writer who walked into oblivion. Ambrose Bierce was no stranger to death. As a Union soldier in the American Civil War, and later as a cynical journalist and writer of dark, biting stories, most famously an occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge, he had built a life upon exploring the absurdity, cruelty, and mystery of human mortality. But it is his own vanishing in 1913 that has secured him a strange kind of literary immortality. At the age of 71, Bierce traveled to Mexico during a time of revolutionary upheaval and then simply vanished from the pages of history. No confirmed remains, no verified eyewitnesses, no final letters, just a last cryptic message and silence. Bierce had lived a life tinged with both brilliance and tragedy. His works dripped with irony and bleak wit, reflecting his disillusionment with politics, religion, and society. In his later years, alienated from his family and increasingly misanthropic, Bierce became fascinated by the idea of a dramatic, meaningful death. To be a gringo in Mexico? Ah, that is euthanasia, he once wrote. In 1913, he informed friends and associates that he planned to observe the Mexican Revolution firsthand. Many believed he sought out the danger deliberately, almost as a final existential act. His letters from Mexico described travels through Chihuahua, encounters with soldiers, and a grim fascination with the chaos around him. In one of his final communications, he wrote to a friend, "Goodbye if you hear of my being stood up against a Mexican stone wall and shot to rags. Please know that I think that a pretty good way to depart this life." After this, all correspondence ceased. Theories soon flooded in. Some claimed he had been executed while traveling with Pancho Villa's army. Others suggested he had been killed by bandits, succumbed to illness, or wandered into the desert to die alone. Still, no body was ever recovered. No Mexican officials could confirm his death. American diplomats searched, but with the revolution in full swing, chaos reigned and answers were scarce. Over the years, his disappearance took on a mythic quality. Did he fake his death to escape old age? Did he finally live out one of his own tragic endings? The irony that Bierce, the master of ghost stories, mysterious deaths, and moral absurdity, should himself vanish without resolution, only deepened the intrigue. Speculation continues more than a century later. His mysterious end has inspired novels, films, and scholarly debate. Some believe he became disillusioned with both life and his nation, choosing to meet death on his own terms in a land drenched in blood and revolution. Others think he may have joined a rebel faction, lived in disguise, or perished in anonymity far from the history books. No theory has ever been conclusively proven. Ambrose Bierce's disappearance is not just a historical puzzle. It's a fitting final chapter to a life that rejected convention and embraced ambiguity. His entire literary ethos was one of skepticism, irony, and the absurdity of certainty. In many ways, vanishing was the most Bierce-like thing he could have done. It turned him into a legend, one last story, without an ending. A man who had written so often of death simply slipped into its shadow, leaving only the echo of a goodbye and the lingering question, what became of Ambrose Bierce? The Tamam Shud case, Australia's unsolved code and the unknown man. On the morning of December 1st, 1948, a man's lifeless body was discovered slumped against a sea wall on Somerton Beach near Adelaide, Australia. Well dressed in a suit and polished shoes, he had no wallet, no identification, and no visible signs of trauma. What began as a case of an unidentified corpse soon unraveled into one of the most perplexing and enduring mysteries in Australian history, the Tamam Shud case. Over 70 years later, the questions remain: who was this man, how did he die, and what secrets did he take to the grave? At first glance, there was nothing remarkable about the man's appearance. He was estimated to be in his 40s, in excellent physical shape, and all labels had been carefully removed from his clothing. An autopsy failed to reveal a clear cause of death. There were no signs of violence or natural disease, yet some internal organs, particularly the liver and spleen, showed signs of abnormal congestion suggestive of poisoning. However, no toxins could be found in his system. The mystery deepened when investigators discovered a tiny, rolled-up piece of paper hidden in a hidden pocket of his pants. Printed on it were the Persian words Tamam Shud, which mean ended or finished. The phrase is the final line of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, a famous book of poetry. This cryptic clue sparked a nationwide search for the book it had been torn from. Eventually, a man came forward with a copy of the Rubaiyat he had found in his car, which had been left unlocked near Somerton Beach around the time of the body's discovery. Astonishingly, the last page of his copy had been ripped out exactly where Tamam Shud would have appeared. Even stranger, the book contained an indecipherable code written in pencil, as well as a phone number that led police to a woman named Jessica Thompson, known as Jestin in some reports, who lived only a few hundred meters from where the body was found. Jessica denied knowing the man, though her reaction upon seeing a plaster bust of his face was reportedly one of visible shock. Her son, born around that time, bore a striking resemblance to the dead man, leading some to speculate a hidden relationship or even a shared parentage. Despite this and decades of further inquiry, the man remained unidentified. Dubbed the Somerton Man, His case attracted cryptographers, intelligence agencies, and amateur sleuths from around the world. Many suspected espionage given the Cold War context, the use of code, and the man's peculiar cleanliness and lack of identification. In 2022, breakthroughs in forensic genealogy finally led researchers to tentatively identify the Somerton man as Carl Charles Webb, an electrical engineer from Melbourne with a mysterious past of his own. However, even this identification did not close the case. There remains no conclusive explanation for how he ended up on that beach, why he had the coded rubaiyat, or how he died. His life before death and the motivations behind his final moments are still largely unknown. The Tamam Shud case remains one of the great riddles of modern criminal history. It is a story of poetry and poison, of hidden messages and unanswered calls, of a man who arrived without a name and left behind a legacy of questions. Whether spy lover or simply a man lost to time, the Somerton man's enigma continues to haunt Australia and captivate the world. The disappearance of Brian Schaffer, the man who vanished into thin air. On the night of April 1st, 2006, Brian Schaffer, a 27-year-old medical student at Ohio State University, went out for drinks with friends to celebrate the beginning of spring break. The atmosphere was casual and cheerful as they made their way through several bars in Columbus, eventually arriving at the Ugly Tuna Saloon, a popular bar near campus. But sometime after 1:55 a.m., Brian simply vanished. Surveillance cameras caught him entering the bar, but there is no footage of him ever leaving. Despite extensive investigations, media coverage, and the desperate efforts of family and friends, no trace of him has ever been found. Brian Schaffer seemed to disappear from reality itself. From the beginning, the case baffled police. The Ugly Tuna had only one public entrance and exit, both covered by security cameras. Brian is seen on camera laughing and chatting with two women just before 2 a.m., but after that, he disappears. All patrons exiting the bar were recorded on video except Brian. The cameras never captured him, leaving leading investigators to wonder if he had somehow found another exit or hidden route, yet no such route was ever confirmed. The building's roof and service exits were searched, and the area behind the bar was checked for hazards or stairwells. Nothing. Adding to the mystery was the fact that Brian's belongings remained untouched. His car was still in the parking lot. His bank accounts and credit cards showed no activity. He had plans to go on vacation with his girlfriend to Miami just days later, and he'd spoken of proposing during the trip. He had a future mapped out, then suddenly nothing. Friends and family were devastated. His father, Randy Schaffer, became relentless in the search for answers, even setting up a website and following up on countless leads. Tragically, Randy died in a freak accident in 2008 without ever finding out what happened to his son. There was no shortage of theories. Some speculated Brian slipped out wearing someone else's clothes to avoid detection, though the motive for doing so remains unclear. Others suggested he may have fallen victim to foul play, perhaps attacked inside the bar or after leaving through a hypothetical employee exit. But there were no witnesses, no signs of struggle, and no forensic evidence to support any violent scenario. A more bizarre theory involves the urban legend of the smiley face killer, a supposed serial killer or group targeting young men in college towns. However, no solid connection has ever been made. Even digital sleuths have taken on the case, combing through security footage, examining maps of the building, and analyzing every available detail. Still, the disappearance remains completely unexplained. Every logical route leads to a dead end. It's as if Brian Schaffer ceased to exist within a matter of seconds, something no amount of modern technology or investigative effort has been able to make sense of. What makes Brian's case especially haunting is its ordinariness. He wasn't hiking alone in the wilderness or tangled in criminal activity. He was out with friends in a public place in a major city surrounded by people and security cameras. And yet, he vanished without a single clue. His story has become one of the most discussed missing person cases in America, a modern mystery that challenges our assumptions about surveillance safety and the very nature of disappearance. To this day, Brian's image is circulated, his story retold in podcasts and documentaries, and his loved ones still hope for answers. But as years pass with no sign of him, his case remains a chilling reminder that even in a world saturated with technology, some vanishings leave behind nothing but questions. The mystery of the Pollock twins. Reincarnation or remarkable coincidence. In the quiet town of Hexham, England, a tragedy in 1957 became the foundation for one of the most debated cases of alleged reincarnation in modern times. John and Florence Pollock, devout Catholics, were devastated when their two daughters, Joanna 11 and Jacqueline 6, were killed in a car accident while walking to church. A year later, Florence gave birth to twin girls, Jennifer and Gillian. What followed was a series of eerie events and unsettling statements from the twins that led many to believe that the souls of their deceased sisters had returned. From the start, John Pollock believed in reincarnation, a belief that clashed with traditional Catholic doctrine. Florence, more skeptical, resisted the idea. But as the twins grew, even she began to question what was happening. Jennifer, the younger twin, had birthmarks in the same place Jacqueline did, including one on her forehead and another on her waist. Gillian and Jennifer also seemed to display behaviors and preferences mirroring those of their deceased sisters. They requested toys identical to the ones Joanna and Jacqueline had loved, and showed a striking familiarity with places they had never visited, especially the old school in the park their sisters once attended. One of the most haunting incidents occurred when the family visited Hexham for the first time since the accident. The twins, only 4 years old at the time, pointed out landmarks with precision, even identifying the school their sisters had gone to and the playground equipment they had never seen before. They also exhibited a profound fear of cars, often clinging to their mother when a vehicle approached, once screaming, "The car is coming," to get us a chilling echo of their sister's fatal encounter. Psychiatrists and psychologists took an interest in the case, including Dr. Ian Stevenson, a respected figure in the field of parapsychology. Stevenson investigated hundreds of reincarnation cases worldwide, and he considered the Pollock twins one of the most compelling. He interviewed the family extensively, documenting the birthmarks, the behavioral parallels, and the children's memories. While Stevenson stopped short of claiming definitive proof, he argued that the case could not be easily dismissed as coincidence or parental suggestion. Skeptics, of course, offer alternative explanations. They suggest that the parents, especially John, may have unknowingly influenced the twins' behavior through subconscious cues or selective reinforcement. Others argue that the children may have absorbed stories and preferences from their grieving parents and incorporated them into their identities. Yet this does little to explain the precise physical birthmarks or the spontaneous, uncoached memories of places and events. As the twins aged, their memories of their past lives faded, and by the age of 5 or 6, most of the unusual behavior had disappeared. Both went on to lead ordinary lives, seemingly untouched by the mystery that surrounded their early years. But the case remained in public consciousness, raising deep questions about the nature of identity, the soul, and whether consciousness survives death. The story of the Pollock twins continues to be cited in books, documentaries, and academic debates on reincarnation. To believers, it's a rare and powerful example of souls returning to complete an interrupted journey. To skeptics, it's a psychological anomaly, perhaps fueled by grief and suggestion. Either way, it captures the enduring human desire to believe that love and life might extend beyond the grave, and that in some mysterious way, death may not be the end, but merely a beginning anew. The Green Children of Woolpit, Alien Visitors, or Medieval Folklore. In the heart of 12th century Suffolk, England, nestled in the quiet village of Woolpit, a tale emerged that has puzzled historians, folklorists, and theorists for centuries. According to accounts recorded by 2 respected chroniclers of the time, William of Newburgh and Ralph of Coggeshall, a pair of strange children, brother and sister, suddenly appeared near a wolf pit on the edge of town. What made them extraordinary was not just their sudden appearance or the fact they spoke an unknown language, but that their skin was green. The children were discovered by villagers during harvest time, frightened and crying. They were taken into the care of a local landowner, Sir Richard de Calne, who attempted to understand who they were and where they came from. The boy and girl wore unfamiliar clothing made of strange material and refused all food for several days until they saw raw, broad beans which they eagerly consumed. Slowly they began to eat other types of food and eventually lost their greenish hue. Tragically, the boy, who was younger, became sick and died shortly after. The girl, however, survived, learned to speak English, and was baptized. Once she had mastered the local language, she shared a story that only deepened the mystery. She said she and her brother came from a place called St. Martin's Land, a subterranean world where the sun never shone and everything had a greenish twilight. She described it as a place where everyone was green like them and where light was dim like eternal dusk. According to her, they had been tending their father's flock when they followed a strange sound into a tunnel. After walking for some time, they emerged from the cave into the bright sunlight, only to find themselves in Woolpit surrounded by unfamiliar people. This bizarre account has sparked endless speculation. Some believe it's merely medieval folklore, a morality tale or symbolic allegory of the era. Others suggest the children were Flemish refugees, survivors of a massacre or persecution, whose unfamiliar language and sickly appearance, perhaps due to malnutrition or anemia, explained their strangeness. Green skin can result from hypochromic anemia, sometimes caused by poor diet, which might also explain their initial preference for raw beans. But the story's weirder interpretations continue to captivate the public imagination. Some paranormal enthusiasts have suggested the children were extraterrestrials who accidentally arrived on Earth through a dimensional portal or alien craft. Others propose they came from a parallel universe or underground civilization, an idea tied to legends of hollow Earth and hidden realms beneath our feet. The cave they claim to have emerged from adds fuel to these theories, suggesting the possibility of a hidden entrance to another world. Adding to the credibility of the tale is the fact that it was recorded independently by two chroniclers who lived during the time. Though the details vary slightly between their versions, the core narrative remains consistent. Furthermore, the girl reportedly lived a full life in the village and eventually married a local man. She was integrated into society, yet her origins were never satisfactorily explained. To this day, the mystery of the green children endures. Whether seen as alien visitors, interdimensional travelers, or misunderstood refugees, their story serves as a bridge between folklore and the unknown. It challenges the boundaries between myth and history, reminding us that sometimes the strangest events are the ones most persistently recorded and remembered. Woolpit, once just another medieval village, has become an enduring symbol of the inexplicable and a beacon for those who wonder if our world is only a thin veil away from something much stranger. The Lead Masks Case, Brazil's bizarre mystery of the dead technicians. In August 1966, a shocking scene was discovered on Vintém Hill near Rio de Janeiro. Brazil, the lifeless bodies of two men lying side by side in the grass. They were dressed in formal suits and waterproof coats, and beside them lay an empty water bottle and a notebook containing cryptic instructions. But what made the case chilling and enduringly bizarre was what was on their faces: lead masks, like those used to shield against radiation. This became known as the Lead Masks Case, one of Brazil's most perplexing unsolved mysteries, teeming with unanswered questions and theories that range from scientific experiments to alien contact. The two men were later identified as Manuel Pereira da Cruz and Miguel José Viana, both electronic technicians from Campos dos Goitacazes, a city about 170 miles from Rio. They had told their families they were going to buy materials for work and were expected to return the same day. Instead, they ended up dead, lying in the woods under strange circumstances. There were no signs of violence or struggle. Their bodies were untouched. No external injuries were found, and their belongings, including a small amount of cash and a receipt for water, were intact. Yet most puzzling of all, both men wore lead-eye masks handmade and cut crudely from sheets of metal designed to fit over the eyes but serve no clear purpose. The notebook found with them contained strange instructions: 16:30 be at the agreed place, 18:30 ingest capsules after effect, protect metals, wait for mask signal. These cryptic words set off a media frenzy and widespread speculation. What capsules? What mask signal? Who had they met at 16:30? And why would two men willingly walk into the woods, ingest unknown substances, and lie down to die? Investigators struggled to piece together the timeline. Witnesses said the men were seen buying the raincoats and the water bottle in a nearby town. A waitress who served them said they seemed anxious and frequently checked their watches. An autopsy was delayed due to the decomposition of the bodies, which limited the ability to test for toxins or drugs. As a result, whether the men were poisoned, overdosed, or died from natural causes remains inconclusive. Many theorists believe the men were attempting a type of spiritual or scientific experiment, possibly involving contact with extraterrestrials or higher dimensions. At the time, Brazil had a strong subculture of scientific spiritualism, blending technical knowledge with esoteric beliefs. Some suggest they were trying to establish telepathic contact with aliens using psychedelic capsules to open their minds while protecting their eyes from harmful light during a potential visitation. The lead masks in this view were to shield their eyes from a blinding light, perhaps a UFO or a spiritual entity. Skeptics, on the other hand, think they may have been duped by someone who promised them enlightenment or power, and instead led them to their deaths. There's a possibility they were experimenting with radioactivity or electromagnetic energy, but no such equipment was found. Others speculate suicide, but the peaceful placement of their bodies and the mystery of the masks make that difficult to accept without further explanation. Over the decades, the lead masks case has remained an open wound in Brazil's criminal law. Despite attempts to revisit the evidence, the lack of physical proof and the passage of time have rendered the mystery almost unsolvable. But its legacy lives on in books, documentaries, and podcasts as one of the most enigmatic cases of the 20th century, an eerie blend of science, mysticism, and perhaps cosmic curiosity. The disappearance of Lars Mittank, the most mysterious missing tourist. In July 2014, a young German tourist named Lars Mittank vanished without a trace from Varna Airport in Bulgaria. Surveillance footage captured the final seconds of his known whereabouts. Lars suddenly sprinting out of the airport terminal, leaving behind his luggage, passport, and flight home. He scaled a fence and ran into the forest beyond the airport, never to be seen again. What happened to Lars in those final moments remains one of the most baffling unsolved missing persons cases of the modern era, sparking international speculation, wild theories, and a haunting sense of unresolved tragedy. Lars was a 28-year-old man from northern Germany, traveling with friends on a vacation to Bulgaria's Black Sea coast. By all accounts, the trip began normally, sun beach and nightlife. But things took a strange turn when Lars got into a minor altercation at a bar, reportedly over football team rivalries. He was punched and later diagnosed with a ruptured eardrum by a local doctor. Due to the injury, he was advised not to fly until it healed, so he stayed behind in Varna while his friends returned home. That was the last time they saw him. Alone in a foreign country, Lars booked a room in a cheap hotel near the airport. His behavior, according to hotel staff, and his phone calls to family became increasingly erratic. He told his mother that he felt unsafe, that people were following him, and that he needed to leave. He sent cryptic messages, including asking her to cancel his credit cards and warning her not to trust anyone. He reportedly left the hotel in the middle of the night and was seen wandering through the area, nervous and disoriented. On the morning of July 8th, Lars arrived at Varna Airport, intending to fly home. CCTV footage shows him walking calmly through the terminal, then suddenly stopping, seemingly startled. Inexplicably, he drops his bag, turns around, and bolts through the terminal's sliding doors. Outside, he runs across the parking lot, climbs a fence into a construction zone, and disappears into the surrounding woodland. No one has seen him since. Despite extensive searches and international media attention, no trace of Lars has ever been found. His sudden panic, apparent paranoia, and complete disappearance have led to a multitude of theories. Some believe he suffered a psychotic break, possibly induced by medication prescribed for his ear injury or from undiagnosed mental illness. Others speculate he may have been targeted by criminals involved in something illicit or witnessed something he shouldn't have. The most outlandish theories suggest government experimentation, organ trafficking, or even alien abduction. Adding to the eerie nature of the case is the contrast between the normalcy of his early vacation and the terror that overtook him in his final hours. Lars wasn't a troubled person. He had a job, family, and no known mental health issues. The rapid descent into paranoia, and the fact he left all his belongings behind in a moment of sheer panic, suggest something deeply disturbing happened or was perceived to happen during that short window between his ear injury and the airport. To this day, Lars Mittank's disappearance remains a haunting mystery. The final image of him running full speed away from presumed safety, his wide eyes filled with fear, has become symbolic of a question that may never be answered. What was he running from? Whether the truth lies in psychology, crime, or something beyond our comprehension, the disappearance of Lars Mittank continues to disturb, fascinate, and warn us of how fragile the line between reality and chaos can truly be. The Jameson family disappearance. A family vanished into thin air. In October 2009, the Jameson family, Bobby, Sherilyn, and their 6-year-old daughter, Madison, set off into the remote hills of southeastern Oklahoma, seemingly on a casual trip to scout land they were considering buying. A few days later, their pickup truck was discovered abandoned on a rugged dirt path. Inside were their wallets, cell phones, GPS, a significant amount of cash, over $30,000, and even their beloved family dog, half-starved but alive. But the Jamesons themselves had vanished. No struggle, no signs of foul play, and no answers. For years, their disappearance tormented investigators and internet sleuths alike, until in 2013, their skeletal remains were discovered less than 3 miles from where the truck had been found. The cause of death could not be determined. What exactly happened to the Jameson family remains one of the most disturbing modern mysteries in America. The Jamesons were not ordinary in the traditional sense. In the months before their disappearance, family and friends described increasingly odd behavior. Home surveillance footage showed Bobby and Sherilyn walking back and forth from their house to their vehicle, methodically and silently packing their truck, seemingly in a trance. Each made multiple trips but never acknowledged each other, moving with eerie calm and precision. Bobby had recently suffered a serious back injury and was reportedly on heavy pain medication, while Sherilyn was dealing with depression and bipolar disorder. Some relatives claimed the couple believed their house was haunted and that they were being visited by spirits or even demons. Things became more unsettling when investigators discovered a letter Sherilyn had written to Bobby, in which she expressed hatred for him. They also found a satanic Bible and alleged lists referencing spiritual warfare. Some believed the couple may have become involved in occult practices or that they were influenced by paranoid delusions. Others theorized that they had planned a ritualistic suicide or became victims of a cult or dark spiritual experiment. The family's interest in the remote wilderness and sudden decision to move off the grid added more fuel to these suspicions. The large amount of cash found in their truck was also perplexing. Why were they carrying such a sum in an unsecured vehicle in the middle of nowhere? Were they planning to make a down payment for land, or was it connected to something more secretive, perhaps drug-related, or the result of a transaction gone wrong? Yet there were no signs of violence, robbery, or external intrusion. The truck had simply been left there like a time capsule. When the remains of all 3 were finally found badly decomposed and scattered in the woods, any hopes of a conclusive forensic answer died with them. No trauma could be detected, no obvious cause of death assigned. The bodies lay exposed for nearly 4 years through seasons and storms, destroying any potential evidence. To this day, autopsy results remain inconclusive. The Jameson family case haunts not just because of their disappearance, but because of the layers of psychological, spiritual, and environmental mystery that enshroud it. Were they simply a troubled family who got lost and succumbed to exposure? Or were they running from something seen or unseen that finally caught up to them? As with many great mysteries, the lack of answers only deepens the intrigue, leaving behind an echoing question. How can a family simply vanish only to be found years later, lifeless and silent in the woods with no one able to explain why? The Villisca Axe murders, a whole family slain without a trace. In the quiet town of Villisca, Iowa, a horrific event shattered the peace of a summer morning in 1912. On June 10th, the Moore family, Josiah, his wife Sarah, their 4 children, and 2 overnight guests were found brutally murdered in their home. Each had been bludgeoned to death in their sleep with an axe. The doors were locked from the inside. Curtains had been drawn, mirrors covered, and yet no one heard a thing. Over a century later, the Villisca Axe murders remain one of the most disturbing and unsolved mass killings in American history. The family had attended a church service the night before, and 2 young neighbor girls, Lena and Ina Stillinger, were invited to sleep over. Sometime between midnight and dawn, an unknown assailant entered the home. Using Josiah's own axe, the killer systematically moved from room to room, attacking each sleeping victim. Josiah was hit so forcefully that his face was unrecognizable. Investigators later found gouge marks in the ceiling from the upswing of the weapon, evidence of the violent force used. Oddly, the killer had covered all the mirrors with cloth or garments and placed a piece of bacon beside the axe. A kerosene lamp had been dismantled and used as a makeshift light source during the murders, casting eerie shadows in the silent house. The final blow to any sense of logic was the way the killer stayed inside afterward, calmly preparing breakfast and even performing bizarre rituals like laying a cloth over each victim's face. There was no sign of forced entry, and nothing appeared to be stolen. It was clear the motive wasn't robbery. So what was it? A crime of passion, a religious ritual, or an act of sheer madness? Over time, a handful of suspects emerged. One was Reverend George Kelly, an eccentric and deeply disturbed traveling preacher who had attended the same church service as the Moores that night. He later confessed, then recanted, and was ultimately acquitted. Others suspected a local rival of Josiah Moore, whose business dealings had gone sour, or perhaps a transient killer who hopped from town to town, leaving chaos behind. But nothing ever stuck. No fingerprints, no eyewitnesses, no clear motive. The house remained sealed in mystery, and the town fell under the heavy shadow of paranoia. Doors were locked for the first time. Neighbors suspected neighbors, and the legend of Villisca grew. In later years, the house became the subject of paranormal investigations as visitors reported eerie occurrences, disembodied voices, flickering lights, and even unseen hands touching them in the night. Whether from residual trauma or true haunting, the home seemed unwilling to let the past rest. The Villisca Axe murders continue to fascinate and horrify, because they represent the ultimate fear that someone could enter your home in the sanctuary of night and take everything from you quietly, efficiently, and without ever being caught. It's a reminder that evil sometimes hides in the most ordinary places, that justice can remain elusive, and that some questions echo through the decades unanswered and chilling as ever. The Keddy Cabin Murders a Case. So twisted it defied resolution. On April 12, 1981, in the small secluded town of Keddy, California, a brutal and inexplicable crime shattered the quiet of Cabin 28. That morning, 14-year-old Sheila Sharp returned from a sleepover at a neighbor's house to discover the grisly aftermath of what would become one of the most haunting unsolved murders in American history. Inside her family's cabin, her mother, Glenna Sue Sharp, her 15-year-old brother John, and his 17-year-old friend Dana Wingate were found bound with electrical tape and stabbed, beaten, and bludgeoned to death. Her younger siblings, Rick, Greg, and a friend, slept unharmed in a nearby bedroom, completely unaware of the carnage just feet away. But 12-year-old Tina Sharp was missing. What unfolded next would be a decades-long nightmare riddled with investigative failures, conspiracy theories, and disturbing evidence that seemed to vanish into silence. The crime scene was a tableau of terror. Sue's body was naked from the waist down and gagged with a bandana and tape. John and Dana had been beaten so savagely that their skulls were crushed. Blood was splattered across walls and furniture, and signs of prolonged violence indicated that the victims had suffered deeply before death. And yet, despite the brutality, there were no signs of forced entry, raising the unsettling possibility that the victims knew their killers. Tina's disappearance turned the case into a possible kidnapping, and law enforcement launched a desperate search. But her remains would not be found until 3 years later, over 50 miles away in a remote wooded area. The cause of death could not be determined, but her skull and fragments of bones were identified through dental records. The circumstances of her death and the reasons behind her abduction remain murky to this day. The case became a slow-burning tragedy, not just for its brutality, but for the long history of errors and neglect by investigators. Crucial evidence was either lost, ignored, or never followed up. Known suspects, including a man named Martin Smart, a local with a history of abuse and a strange obsession with military gear, were questioned but never charged. Smart had allegedly confessed to a counselor, saying he killed Sue and Tina, but the statement was inexplicably dismissed. His wife later claimed he had burned incriminating items in their fireplace the night of the murders. Even more bizarrely, the very knife believed to be used in the killings was discovered in a nearby pond decades later. The Keddy Cabin murders have become a case study in small-town horror, how close-knit communities can harbor secrets, how justice can be thwarted by incompetence or corruption, and how a family's agony can linger for generations. Sheila Sharp. The daughter who discovered the scene spent years advocating for the case to be reopened, and thanks to her perseverance, investigators eventually revealed that they believed the killers had been known since the start. Yet no one has ever been formally charged. No definitive explanation has been offered, and the ruins of Cabin 28, now demolished, seem to symbolize the decay of answers that once might have been within reach. The Keddy case remains a tragic example of unresolved violence, a chilling story of multiple murders, an abducted child, and a system that, for reasons still unclear, let justice slip away. It reminds us that the deepest horrors are not always committed by strangers, but by those we least expect in places that should have felt safe. The death of Tamla, Horsford accident, or something more sinister. In November 2018, Tamla Horsford, a 40-year-old mother of 5, attended an adult slumber party in Forsyth County, Georgia. a gathering of football, food, drinks, and games hosted by a group of middle-aged suburban moms. By morning, she was dead, found face down in the backyard below a 14-foot balcony. What at first was ruled an accidental fall from the deck quickly turned into one of the most controversial and racially charged cases in recent memory. Many continue to ask, was Tamla Horsford's death truly an accident, or was something far more sinister at play? Tamla was the only black woman at the gathering, which was attended by around a dozen, mostly white individuals. Initially, the host and guests told police they had gone to bed around 1:30 a.m., and Tamla was last seen on the balcony, smoking a cigarette, reportedly intoxicated. When the host's aunt looked outside the next morning, she found Tamla's body lying in the yard below. First responders arrived to a scene that had already been touched. People had gone near the body. One man said he had moved her leg, and others had taken photos. The original autopsy stated her injuries were consistent with a fall, multiple abrasions, a laceration on the heart, dislocated wrist, and blunt force trauma to the head. But soon red flags emerged. Her injuries seemed inconsistent with a simple fall. A second independent autopsy requested by the family revealed more severe trauma, including extensive injuries to her head, neck, and torso. Notably, the family questioned why no one had heard a fall from such a height and why some partygoers seemed evasive during interviews. Surveillance footage inside the house was mysteriously missing from the critical time period. Adding fuel to the fire, leaked text messages revealed jokes and insensitive comments among attendees after her death, and one individual involved had ties to law enforcement. This sparked public outrage and led to accusations of a cover-up. How could a fall off a balcony lead to injuries resembling an assault? And why had the scene not been treated with the rigor of a potential crime investigation from the beginning? Pressure from activists, journalists, and social media brought the case back into the spotlight, especially during the national reckoning on racial injustice in 2020. Celebrities like T.I. and 50 Cent posted about it. The hashtag Justice for Tamla went viral. Eventually, the FBI stepped in to review the case at the request of local officials. In 2021, the FBI closed its inquiry, stating that there was no evidence of foul play. Yet many remained unsatisfied. Questions linger about the mishandling of the scene, the integrity of those present, and whether implicit bias played a role in the rush to label her death accidental. To Tamla's family and a growing community of supporters, the pain isn't just about her death. It's about the feeling that her life didn't matter enough to warrant a full, transparent investigation. Tamla Horsford's case serves as a haunting symbol of how trust in justice can erode when answers seem elusive, especially at the intersection of race, privilege, and power. Whether her death was truly accidental or not, the public scrutiny it sparked has become part of her legacy, a cry for accountability in a system too often willing to look the other way. The silent twins who were June and Jennifer Gibbons, and why did one die mysteriously? The story of June and Jennifer Gibbons, identical twins born in 1963 in Wales, is one of the most haunting and perplexing psychological mysteries of modern times. Known as the Silent Twins, their inexplicable bond and eventual tragic separation have fascinated and disturbed psychologists, journalists, and artists for decades. What began as an odd case of twin isolation grew into a chilling tale of shared madness, mutual obsession, and a death that to this day feels shrouded in supernatural unease. From an early age, June and Jennifer were inseparable and intensely private. They developed a unique rapid-fire language only they could understand, effectively cutting themselves off from everyone around them, including their own family. Teachers and classmates reported that the girls were silent at school, never speaking to anyone but each other. Despite efforts by speech therapists and psychologists to integrate them socially, the twins remained locked in their exclusive world. By adolescence, their isolation grew darker. They retreated into obsessive creative writing, penning eerie novels filled with crime, lust, and violence. But their fiction began bleeding into real life. As teens, they committed a series of petty crimes, shoplifting, vandalism, and eventually arson. They were caught and in 1982 sentenced to the infamous Broadmoor Hospital, a high-security psychiatric institution in England. There they spent over a decade medicated and closely observed, but still emotionally and psychologically bound to each other in ways doctors could not unravel. What disturbed clinicians the most wasn't just their refusal to speak, it was the evident sense that one twin could not live without the other, and yet at the same time could not live with her either. Their diaries revealed a hidden, violent emotional dynamic. Each twin documented her hatred and fear of the other, along with declarations of love and longing. They described themselves as trapped in a psychological cage, aware that their fate was somehow intertwined. Then came the shocking twist. In 1993, shortly after being transferred to a lower security facility, and shortly before their anticipated release, Jennifer Gibbons died suddenly of acute myocarditis, an inflammation of the heart. She was only 29 years old. There were no drugs in her system, no poison, no pre-existing condition. Her death was ruled natural, but the circumstances were anything but. June later stated that Jennifer had chosen to die so that the other could finally live a normal life. Indeed, following Jennifer's death, June began to speak freely for the first time in her life. She started integrating into society, engaging with others, and living what observers described as a normal life. It was as though Jennifer's death had lifted a strange, invisible burden. But how can one explain a death seemingly willed into being? Was it a psychosomatic shutdown, a case of death by mutual psychic agreement, or something else entirely, something inexplicable? The story of the silent twins raises profound questions about identity dependence and the limits of psychological understanding. How can two people become so enmeshed that one must die for the other to be free? And what dark truth lies in the idea that death for them may have been the only path to separation? Their lives have inspired documentaries, books, and plays, but no retelling fully captures the eerie, otherworldly nature of their bond. In the end, the silent twins were not just subjects of psychiatric fascination. They were a living riddle, one that even in death refuses to be solved. The death of Kendrick Johnson. Accident or cover-up? The discovery of Kendrick Johnson's body in January 2013 sent shockwaves through Valdosta, Georgia, and soon the entire country. The 17-year-old high school athlete was found rolled up in a vertical gym mat in his school's athletic facility. His face was bloated and bruised. His body positioned head first inside the mat, feet barely visible at the top. Within hours, local authorities declared it a tragic accident that Kendrick had fallen inside the mat while reaching for a shoe and suffocated. But to his family, and many others, that explanation never sat right. Instead, it launched a years-long battle for justice that continues to this day, driven by suspicion of a cover-up, racial injustice, and an unsettling trail of missing evidence. According to the official narrative, Kendrick stored his gym shoes behind the mats and had likely tried to retrieve them by diving headfirst into the tightly rolled tube. But questions quickly piled up. First, the positioning of his body made little sense. Why would a seasoned athlete attempt to reach for a shoe in such a precarious way? And how could he have suffocated without struggling, calling out, or being noticed in a school full of people? The Johnson family commissioned a private autopsy, which revealed blunt force trauma to Kendrick's neck and questioned the original ruling of accidental death. More disturbing was the discovery that Kendrick's internal organs were missing, replaced with newspaper. The funeral home said the organs had been destroyed through natural processes and discarded, while the coroner said they were missing before the body even arrived. This macabre detail added fuel to the fire, prompting many to suspect a deliberate effort to conceal the truth. Video surveillance from the school only deepened suspicions. Footage appeared to show time gaps, missing frames, and unclear angles, particularly around the time Kendrick was last seen. Though the school claimed technical issues, many viewed it as potential evidence tampering. Then came rumors implicating 2 students, both sons of an FBI agent, in Kendrick's death. Though no hard evidence linked them to the crime, the suggestion of privilege and protection raised public ire. The Johnsons filed multiple lawsuits, accusing classmates and officials of involvement or negligence. The case was reopened by federal investigators in 2014 but closed in 2016 without charges, citing lack of evidence. Then, in 2021, the Lowndes County Sheriff reopened the case again, this time with over 17 boxes of new evidence. Yet after an extensive review, they too concluded there was no foul play. Despite these findings, the public remains divided. To many, Kendrick's death is emblematic of how the justice system can fail Black families, especially in communities where law enforcement, politics, and race intersect. The image of his lifeless body stuffed into a mat, the contradictions in the investigation, the missing organs. These are not elements that settle into a tidy narrative. The Johnson family continues to fight for answers. They believe Kendrick was murdered and that those responsible have been shielded by power and influence. Whether or not the full truth will ever emerge, Kendrick's death has become a symbol of unresolved injustice, institutional failure, and the haunting possibility that some truths are deliberately buried. The Yuba County Five. A real-life American Dyatlov Pass. On a cold night in February 1978, 5 young men from Yuba City, California, vanished after attending a college basketball game in Chico. Their disappearance and the bizarre discoveries that followed have become one of America's most confounding unsolved mysteries. Often referred to as the American Dyatlov Pass incident, the case of the Yuba County Five evokes the same sense of dread and confusion as the famous Russian tragedy, defined by inexplicable choices, environmental extremes, and deaths that simply defy logic. The 5 men, Gary Mathias, Bill Sterling, Jack Hewitt, Ted Wire, and Jack Madruga, were close friends, each with mild intellectual disabilities or mental health conditions. Despite these challenges, they led relatively independent lives and were enthusiastic about their basketball league. On February 24, 1978, they drove in Madruga's car to see their favorite team play. They never returned home. 4 days later, their Mercury Montego was found abandoned on a remote mountain road far from any route leading home. The car was in working order with enough gas and showed no signs of distress. Curiously, the area was covered in snow, and the elevation was high, raising the first question: why did the men drive into such a desolate mountainous area? Late at night, months passed before the snow melted, revealing answers only they made the mystery deeper. On June 4th, searchers discovered the body of Ted Wire inside a Forest Service trailer nearly 20 miles from the car. He was wrapped in sheets, his beard grown out, and appeared to have survived up to 13 weeks after disappearing. Shockingly, the trailer had food heating and matches, but none of it had been used. Why didn't Ted or anyone else attempt to survive using the supplies that were literally within reach? Soon after, the remains of Bill Sterling and Jack Madruga were found 11 miles from the car, and Jack Hewitt's body was discovered 2 miles further. All appeared to have died from exposure. Only Gary Mathias, who had schizophrenia and was on medication, was never found. His shoes were in the trailer, suggesting he may have survived with Ted for some time before venturing out into the snowy wilderness. The questions continue to haunt investigators and the public. Why did they abandon a functional car in freezing temperatures? Why trek uphill through snow toward a location they didn't know? Why did no one eat the food or light the stove in the trailer? Was someone chasing them? Were they hallucinating? Or did Gary Mathias, who had a history of erratic behavior, somehow lead them astray? Some theories suggest foul play. Others speculate about a shared psychotic break or even supernatural causes. Yet none offer a fully satisfactory explanation. The circumstances remain too strange, too fragmented to form a cohesive narrative. To this day, the Yuba County Five remain a symbol of terrifying ambiguity. Like the Dyatlov Pass hikers, their story is marked by eerie coincidences, fractured clues, and the chilling realization that we may never truly know what happened in those cold, desolate woods. The death of Rebecca Zahaw, suicide or staged murder. The death of Rebecca Zahaw in July 2011 is a case that continues to baffle. Experts provoke public outrage and challenge the boundaries of forensic interpretation. Found hanging naked from a balcony at the historic Spreckles Mansion in Coronado, California, her hands and feet bound a T-shirt stuffed in her mouth, and a cryptic message scrawled on a nearby door. Zahaw's death was swiftly ruled a suicide by authorities. But nearly every detail of the scene defied that conclusion. In the years since, evidence has surfaced, pointing to a chilling alternative that Zahaw was murdered and that the truth has been buried under a veil of wealth power and investigative missteps. Rebecca Zahaw was the girlfriend of pharmaceutical tycoon Jonah Shacknai. Just 2 days before her death, Jonah's 6-year-old son Max fell over the mansion's second-floor banister, while in Rebecca's care, suffering fatal injuries. The official story goes that Zahaw, overwhelmed by guilt, took her own life. But those who knew her say she was religious, strong-minded, and committed to her family traits that made suicide seem out of character. More disturbingly, the condition of her body and the manner of her death appeared too elaborate and violent to have been self-inflicted. Her wrists and ankles were bound tightly with red rope. Her arms were tied behind her back in a way that would be nearly impossible for someone to do to themselves. She was completely nude, a detail that many argue suggests humiliation rather than self-destruction. The T-shirt stuffed into her mouth and the message on the door, "She saved him, can you save her?" added a haunting theatrical element to the scene. Despite these alarming inconsistencies, the San Diego Sheriff's Department maintained their ruling of suicide after 2 separate investigations. But Rebecca's family wasn't convinced. They launched a wrongful death lawsuit against Jonah's brother, Adam Shacknai, who'd been staying at the mansion and claimed to have discovered the body. The civil trial jury found Adam responsible for her death in 2018, awarding Rebecca's family $5 million in damages, though no criminal charges were filed. Adam has always maintained his innocence and called the verdict a miscarriage of justice. The case has become a battleground between opposing forces, law enforcement's assertion of suicide versus the Zahau family's insistence on murder. Key questions persist. Why was no DNA from Rebecca found on the ropes? Why were her fingerprints absent from the scene, including the knife used to cut the rope? Why was Adam, the only other person known to be on the property, never subjected to deeper scrutiny in a criminal court? Forensic experts, criminologists, and internet sleuths alike remain divided. Some say it's a textbook example of a rush to judgment by police unwilling to investigate the wealthy and powerful. Others believe the tragedy was exactly what it seemed, a dramatic, grief-fueled suicide. But the imagery of a bound, silenced woman hanging from a balcony continues to disturb, raising unsettling questions about what truly happened that night and whether justice has ever been served. The Zahau case reminds us that truth in death is not always clear, and that when conflicting narratives compete, the louder voice is not always the most truthful. Whether Rebecca's death was a final cry of despair or a cruelly staged execution remains one of the most disturbing and unresolved mysteries in recent American history. The disappearance of Brandon Swanson. The vanishing voice on the phone. On the night of May 14, 2008, 19-year-old Brandon Swanson disappeared without a trace in rural Minnesota, leaving behind a mystery as haunting as it is heartbreaking. What makes Brandon's case particularly chilling is that in the final moments before his disappearance, he was actively speaking on the phone with his father. One moment, he was calmly describing his surroundings, trying to find his way home. The next, he cried out, "Oh shit," and the line went silent. His body has never been found. His phone was never used again, and to this day the case remains one of the most baffling disappearances in American history. Brandon had been celebrating the end of the spring semester with friends in Canby, Minnesota. Around midnight, he began driving home to Marshall, a 30-mile trip he had made many times before. At approximately 1:15 a.m., his car went off the road and got stuck in a ditch, uninjured and calm. Brandon called his parents for help. He told them he was near the town of Lind, just a few miles from their home. His parents drove out, but they couldn't find him. Over the next 47 minutes, Brandon stayed on the line with his father, describing his attempts to walk toward lights he believed were in Lind. But investigators later discovered something strange. Brandon's car wasn't anywhere near Lind. It was located over 20 miles away, near the town of Taunton. This raised unsettling questions. Was Brandon confused, or was he trying to meet someone and lying about his location? Had he been misled? More disturbingly, the landscape he was walking through consisted of remote fields, rivers, and gravel roads. A dangerous place to be at night, especially alone. The last moments of the phone call are what haunt people most. Just as Brandon said he was nearing the lights, he suddenly shouted, "Oh shit," and then the line went dead. The call never reconnected, and repeated attempts to reach him failed. Authorities launched an extensive search using dogs, helicopters, and volunteers. Cadaver dogs eventually traced his scent from his abandoned car to a gravel road, and then toward the Yellow Medicine River, suggesting he may have fallen into the water. But no remains have ever been found. There are many theories. One suggests Brandon fell into the river and drowned, his body swept away by the current. Another posits he encountered foul play, perhaps. Someone picked him up and harmed him after the call ended. Yet another theory explores the possibility that he succumbed to hypothermia or injury in the rural wilderness and simply was never found due to the vast uneven terrain. Brandon's disappearance led to important legislative change in Minnesota. Known as Brandon's Law, passed in 2009, it mandates that law enforcement must take a missing adult case seriously and begin investigating immediately regardless of the adult's age or perceived intentions. It was a necessary change, one born of the Swanson family's suffering and frustration with how slowly police responded when Brandon first vanished. More than a decade later, the Swanson family continues to search for answers, holding out hope that one day someone will come forward with the piece of information that solves the puzzle. Until then, Brandon's voice, clear calm, and then suddenly cut off, continues to echo through the silence he left behind. The death of Phoebe Hansjuk, a tragic fall, or something more sinister? The death of 24-year-old Phoebe Hansjuk in Melbourne, Australia, remains one of the most disturbing and contested cases in recent memory. A story woven with elegance, horror, and lingering suspicion. On December 2, 2010, Phoebe's body was discovered at the bottom of a garbage disposal chute from the 12th floor of a luxury apartment building where she lived with her boyfriend Anthony Hampel, a prominent events promoter. The official verdict was accidental death, but the circumstances are so unusual, so grotesque, that many, including her own family, believe she was murdered. Phoebe was intelligent, artistic, and deeply emotional, but she also struggled with depression, alcohol use, and a history of self-harm. On the night of her death, she had been drinking heavily. Her blood alcohol level was more than 3 times the legal driving limit. According to the police, she somehow climbed into the garbage chute feet first and fell 12 stories into a compactor where her body was found with horrific injuries. The official theory that it was a bizarre alcohol-fueled accident. But nearly every detail of the case defies that explanation. For starters, the garbage chute was just 40 centimeters wide, around 16 inches, barely enough for a small adult to slide through, let alone willingly climb into, while intoxicated. The door to the chute was high off the ground and required significant strength and coordination to open and enter. Moreover, forensic experts noted that Phoebe's injuries were inconsistent with a simple fall. She had deep lacerations, including a near-severed foot, and signs of impact damage that suggested she may have been unconscious or even dead before entering the chute. Then there's the timeline. CCTV footage showed no one entering or exiting the apartment between the time she was last seen alive and when her body was discovered. Her boyfriend claimed he was asleep and heard nothing. But when police arrived, they found cleaning supplies out and a computer in the midst of being wiped. Despite this, no forensic examination on the apartment was conducted at the time, no fingerprints taken, no blood spatter analysis, nothing. Investigators concluded it was a suicide or freak accident and closed the case. Phoebe's family was outraged. Her grandfather, a retired detective, spearheaded his own investigation, and later a coroner's inquest revealed glaring holes in the original inquiry. The coroner agreed that while suicide couldn't be ruled out, the possibility that Phoebe had been placed in the chute by another party cannot be discounted. Yet despite mounting evidence that suggested foul play, no criminal charges were filed. The case has become a symbol of institutional failure, class privilege, and the dangers of assuming mental illness automatically equates to suicide. Public suspicion continues to focus on Hampel, although no definitive evidence links him to her death. To this day, questions about what really happened in apartment 1201 on that December night remain unanswered. Was Phoebe's death truly a tragic accident fueled by alcohol and despair? Or was it the perfect crime disguised as the unthinkable? Whatever the truth, the image of Phoebe beautiful, gifted and gone in such a grotesque, unexplained way, continues to haunt those who seek justice in her name. The disappearance of Asha, degree the girl who vanished in the dark. On a rainy Valentine's Day morning in 2000, 9-year-old Asha Degree vanished from her home in Shelby, North Carolina. What makes her case so chilling is not just the fact that she disappeared, but that she apparently left of her own volition, walking into the darkness before dawn, never to return. For over 2 decades, her family has lived with the tormenting question, why did Asha leave and what happened to her once she did? That night, Asha's father last saw her around 2:30 a.m. sleeping peacefully in her bed, but by 6:30 a.m., when her mother went to wake her for school, she was gone. There was no sign of forced entry, no signs of a struggle, just a quiet, heartbreaking void. At first, police considered the possibility of abduction, but then 2 separate motorists reported seeing a young girl walking alone along Highway 18 around 4 a.m., dressed in a white shirt and pants, despite the cold and stormy weather. One driver said he turned his car around out of concern, but by the time he did, the girl had vanished into the woods. The sighting was confirmed, and search dogs tracked her scent to that location, then lost it. Days later, investigators found a shed where it appeared Asha may have taken shelter. Then a week after she vanished, her pencil marker and a hairbow, items known to belong to her, were discovered in a nearby tool shed. But that was all. There was no further trace of Asha for over a year. Then came a deeply disturbing clue. In August 2001, Asha's backpack was found buried in plastic bags 26 miles away in Burke County. It contained some of her belongings, including a Dr. Seuss book and a New Kids on the Block t-shirt, items her family insists they never owned. The fact that it had been buried rather than simply discarded strongly suggested foul play. Yet no suspects emerged. The discovery added to the mystery: who took her backpack, and why had Asha met with someone she trusted, or was she lured away by a predator? What's particularly haunting is the sense that Asha had planned something. Her family found that some of her belongings were missing, and it later emerged that she had been reading a book at school about a little girl who ran away and had an adventure. Did Asha, an impressionable child, believe she could recreate such a story in real life? Over the years, investigators have pursued hundreds of leads, yet none have brought closure. In 2016, the FBI reopened the case and released new age progression images of what Asha might look like as a teenager and adult. A $45,000 reward was also offered for information leading to her recovery. In 2020, a tip suggested that Asha may have been seen getting into a dark green car, a possible critical clue that has still not been verified. Despite the long years and agonizing uncertainty, Asha's family has never given up. Her mother, Aquila Degree, continues to speak out, organize searches, and raise awareness in hopes that someone somewhere knows something and will come forward. Asha Degree's story isn't just a mystery, it's a wound in the heart of a family and a community. The image of a small girl walking into the night on a stormy morning, clutching a backpack and disappearing without a trace, is one that continues to haunt all who hear it. What was she looking for? Who did she meet? And why, after all these years, has no one come forward to tell the truth? The mysterious death of Alisa Dmitrieva, the missing girl at the Queen's estate. The quiet grandeur of Sandringham House. One of the British royal family's private estates was shattered in 2012 when the skeletal remains of a teenage girl were discovered on its grounds. The victim was 17-year-old Alisa Dmitrieva, a Latvian-born girl living in Cambridgeshire, who had vanished without a trace several months earlier. What followed was a disturbing investigation that raised more questions than answers and cast a shadow over one of the most secure and closely monitored properties in Britain. Alisa was last seen alive on the night of August 30th, 2011. She had been in contact with friends and had reportedly visited a traveler site in Norfolk. Her last known text message, sent in the early hours of August 31st, stated that she was in a car in the King's Lynn area. After that, nothing. Her phone went silent, her social media accounts were never touched again, and despite appeals from her family, she remained missing for over 4 months. Then, on New Year's Day in 2012, a dog walker stumbled upon human remains in a wooded area near Anma on the Sandringham estate, a property surrounded by CCTV, patrolled by security, and frequently visited by the royal family. It was an unthinkable location for a body to be dumped hidden in plain sight, yet undetected for months. The remains were later identified as Alisa through dental records and DNA. The manner of death was inconclusive. The body was so decomposed that forensic experts could not determine a cause. There were no obvious signs of trauma or injury. No clothing or personal effects were found with the body. Essentially, nothing was left behind except the chilling fact that this young girl had ended up dead on one of the most guarded pieces of land in the UK. Police launched a full investigation, interviewing over 300 people, but no one was ever charged. They combed through Alisa's phone records, social circles, and social media, but leads dried up quickly. One theory suggested she may have died from an overdose or been left for dead by someone she trusted. Another posited that she could have been trafficked or the victim of a violent crime. But without any evidence, her death remains an open mystery. What adds to the unease is the location. The idea that a teenager's body could lie undiscovered for months on royal grounds just a short distance from where the Queen would spend her Christmas holiday is deeply unsettling. It raises questions about how such a security breach could occur and why the body wasn't found sooner. Alisa's family has been left with a gaping hole and no closure. Her mother and grandmother, who had immigrated to the UK in hopes of a better life, have since returned to Latvia, haunted by the lack of justice. Despite public appeals and multiple documentaries about the case, interest in Alisa's story has faded from headlines, but the tragedy of her death lingers like a shadow over Sandringham's manicured lawns. Her case stands as a grim reminder, even in places of power, prestige and protection, evil can slip through the cracks, and sometimes the most haunted grounds are the ones most heavily guarded. The vanishing of the Springfield. 3 women, one summer night and no answers. On the warm night of June 6, 1992, in Springfield, Missouri, 3 women vanished without a trace from a tidy suburban home. The case would come to be known as the Springfield Three, and it remains one of the most perplexing unsolved mysteries in American history. The women, 47-year-old Cheryl Levitt, her 19-year-old daughter Susie Streeter, and Susie's best friend, 18-year-old Stacy McCall, had just celebrated their high school graduation. They were looking forward to a carefree summer. Instead, they disappeared without leaving behind a single clue. That night, Stacy and Susie had attended several graduation parties. Originally, they were supposed to spend the night at a friend's house, but plans changed at the last minute. They decided instead to go back to Susie's home, where her mother, Cheryl, had already retired for the evening. None of them were ever seen again. The following morning, friends who came by to visit found the front door unlocked, the porch light still on, and the women's cars parked outside. Inside the house, the women's purses, clothing, and personal items were untouched. The TV was on, and Susie's dog was agitated. Yet there were no signs of a struggle, forced entry, or foul play. It was as if the 3 women had been plucked from their lives in an instant. As hours turned into days, investigators became increasingly baffled. Early missteps in the investigation, such as friends and family unknowingly tampering with the scene by cleaning up and entering the home before police arrived, may have destroyed key evidence. Despite a massive effort involving law enforcement and volunteers, no credible leads materialized. One theory is that the women were abducted by someone they knew, someone they let in willingly. Another suggests a stranger entered the home in the early hours of the morning. Over the years, several people have claimed to have knowledge of the crime, including prison informants, but none of the information has been substantiated. In one chilling twist, a convicted criminal claimed that the women had been murdered and buried in the foundation of a local hospital parking garage. Authorities scanned the area with ground-penetrating radar, but found nothing conclusive. The absence of physical evidence, no fingerprints, no signs of a struggle, no ransom note makes this case especially eerie. It's not just a disappearance, it's an erasure. The Springfield Three didn't just go missing, they seemed to vanish from the fabric of reality itself. And that's perhaps what makes the case so haunting. There is no closure, no body, no confirmed crime scene, only 3 lives suspended in time and a grieving community still searching for answers. More than 3 decades have passed, but hope endures. In 2021, the FBI released age-progressed images of the women and renewed their appeal for information. Tips still trickle in, and the families cling to the belief that someone somewhere knows the truth. The story of the Springfield Three isn't just about a disappearance. It's about how quickly life can change, how mystery can strike even in the most familiar places, and how the search for truth becomes a lifetime pursuit for those left behind. The disappearance of Sneha Ann Phillip. The mystery, entwined with 9/11. On September 10, 2001, Dr. Sneha Ann Phillip, a 31-year-old physician living in Lower Manhattan, was seen shopping for clothing and household items at a department store near the World Trade Center. It would be the last confirmed sighting of her. The next day, the world changed forever. The terrorist attacks on the Twin Towers buried countless lives under rubble and chaos. But among the tragic losses, Sneha's disappearance remains uniquely enigmatic. Was she a hero who rushed to help in the chaos of 9/11, or did she vanish under entirely different circumstances? Sneha lived just a few blocks from the World Trade Center with her husband, Ron Lieberman, also a physician. According to Ron, the couple had a minor argument the night before her disappearance. Sneha left the apartment and spent time alone shopping, possibly meeting friends. Surveillance footage shows her entering a department store on the evening of September 10th, and then nothing. She never came home. When the towers fell on the morning of September 11th, Ron initially assumed Sneha was safe. But as hours turned into days and she didn't return or contact anyone, his fear mounted. Given her proximity to Ground Zero, a heartbreaking theory took shape. Sneha saw the disaster unfolding and, true to her nature as a doctor, rushed to help, only to perish in the chaos, undocumented, unrecorded, lost in the smoke and debris. Yet the mystery deepens. No one reported seeing Sneha near the Twin Towers that morning. Her name was not on any official victim lists. No hospital had registered her as assisting. Some investigators pointed to inconsistencies in her recent behavior. Sneha had been suspended from her hospital due to alleged professional conduct issues. Her family denied these claims, but questions arose about her mental health and personal struggles, including hints of substance use and a complicated social life. Could she have chosen to disappear? The legal battle that followed revealed just how murky the case had become. In 2004, Sneha's name was removed from the official list of 9/11 victims due to lack of evidence. But her family fought back. In 2008, after years of appeals, a New York state court ruled that the most likely scenario was that Sneha died trying to help victims at Ground Zero, and she was officially recognized as one of the thousands who perished in the attacks. Yet even with that ruling, the mystery lingers. There are no eyewitness accounts placing her at the scene. No remains have ever been identified. And some believe the decision to include her on the list of victims was more about offering closure than confirming fact. The story of Sneha and Philip is deeply tragic, not only because she may have died in one of the most horrifying events in modern history, but because her fate remains wrapped in ambiguity. Her disappearance straddles the line between a private unraveling and a public catastrophe, between a personal crisis and a national trauma. In the end, Sneha became both a symbol of the countless unrecorded acts of heroism that may have occurred on 9/11 and a poignant reminder that sometimes, even in an event so widely witnessed and documented, a single person can still vanish without a trace. The toxic Lady Gloria Ramirez and the hospital incident that defied science. On the evening of February 19, 1994, Gloria Ramirez, a 31-year-old woman from Riverside, California, was rushed to the emergency room suffering from late-stage cervical cancer complications. What unfolded over the next hour stunned doctors, nurses, and toxicologists alike, and earned her a place in medical folklore as the Toxic Lady. Ramirez's case is infamous not because of her illness, but because everyone who tried to save her began collapsing one by one in a bizarre chain reaction that science has never fully explained. Gloria arrived at the emergency room in obvious distress, confused with an accelerated heart rate and struggling to breathe. Nurses and doctors began treating her using standard procedures, oxygen sedatives, and defibrillation. But almost immediately, staff began noticing strange symptoms. One nurse said her body gave off an oily sheen and an unusual garlic-like odor. A respiratory therapist noticed crystals in her blood. Moments later, that therapist fainted. Then a nurse passed out, then a doctor. In total, 23 people fell ill and 5 were hospitalized. The ER was evacuated and chaos ensued. Gloria Ramirez died shortly thereafter from heart failure, but the mystery was just beginning. Why did multiple trained professionals, many of whom were wearing protective gear, suddenly collapse after merely being in proximity to her? Was she emitting some sort of toxic substance? The media quickly dubbed her the Toxic Lady, and speculation ran wild. Was it a case of mass hysteria, a leaked chemical weapon, some unknown viral contagion? An independent investigation concluded that the hospital workers may have suffered from mass psychogenic illness, essentially a shared psychological response, triggered by stress and a few suggestive physical symptoms. But many of the affected staff rejected this explanation, insisting their symptoms were real and physical, not imagined. A more controversial and complex theory emerged from Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory. Their hypothesis, Ramirez had been using a home remedy involving dimethyl sulfoxide DMSO to ease her pain. DMSO is a solvent that, when absorbed through the skin, can have various side effects. Under certain conditions, particularly when exposed to oxygen and electric shocks, it can chemically transform into dimethyl sulfate, a highly toxic compound. According to this theory, the combination of Ramirez's body chemistry, her treatment, and the hospital environment may have created a perfect storm, temporarily turning her into a human chemical hazard. Yet this explanation remains debated. The science, while plausible, is not universally accepted. Critics argue that the transformation from DMSO to a toxic gas like dimethyl sulfate under clinical conditions is unlikely. Moreover, no toxic substances were conclusively identified in Ramirez's body during autopsy. The lack of definitive answers has made this case the subject of countless documentaries, journal articles, and conspiracy theories. Was it a freak chemical reaction? A medical mystery born of stress and suggestion? Or something science hasn't yet categorized? Gloria Ramirez's case continues to baffle experts and fuel debate. It's a reminder of how much we still don't understand about human chemistry and how even a standard emergency room procedure can become the setting for something utterly inexplicable. In the end, it wasn't just her illness that made her a medical enigma. It was the chain reaction she set off, one that still echoes through hospital hallways and scientific journals to this day. The Setagaya family murders. A brutal killing and a killer who stayed the night. On the night of December 30th, 2000, a horrific crime occurred in the quiet suburbs of Setagaya, Tokyo. One that would go on to haunt Japan as one of its most disturbing and unsolved murder cases. The Miyazawa family father, Mikio mother Yasuko, and their 2 children, 8-year-old Nina and 6-year-old Rei, were brutally murdered in their own home. But what truly chills investigators to this day is not just the savagery of the killings, but the eerie behavior of the murderer. They stayed in the house for hours afterward, acting as if they belonged there. The Miyazawas lived in a modest house on a cul-de-sac beside a park. That night, something or someone entered the home through a second-floor bathroom window. Around 11:30 p.m., the killer attacked. Rei was strangled in his sleep. Mikio fought back downstairs but was fatally stabbed. Yasuko and Nina were killed next. Forensics would later show the attack was vicious knife wounds, defensive injuries, and overwhelming force. But what the killer did afterward was even more unsettling. He stayed. He raided the fridge and ate ice cream. He used the family's computer, possibly even browsing websites. He used the toilet and didn't flush. He left his bloody clothes behind, as well as the murder weapon items which would become crucial to the investigation. Even more bizarrely, he took a nap on the family's couch. It was as if the boundaries between guest and killer intruder and resident had dissolved. The Tokyo Metropolitan Police launched one of the largest investigations in Japanese history. They collected over 12,000 DNA samples, interviewed thousands of people, and traced the killer's clothing and items, some of which were linked to stores in specific regions. DNA and blood evidence suggested the killer had mixed ancestry, East Asian and possibly Southern European or Middle Eastern. He had sand in his clothing that came from the Nevada desert in the U.S., which led investigators to speculate he may have had connections to a military base. Still, no match was ever found. One of the most frustrating aspects for authorities is how much physical evidence they have. Fingerprints, DNA, even stool samples. The killer bled at the scene, suggesting he injured himself. Yet despite all this, there's been no arrest. No confirmed suspect, no clear motive. Theories range from personal vendetta to thrill kill to random home invasion. Some believe the killer may have suffered from a psychological disorder. Others suspect a foreign national who left Japan soon after the murder. But all remain speculation. What makes the Setagaya murders so haunting is the combination of brutality and intimacy. This wasn't a quick, in-and-out burglary gone wrong. The killer was unhurried. He lingered in the home of the people he had just slaughtered, as if absorbing their life or daring the world to catch him. The fact that he remained in close proximity to the bodies, ate their food, and used their space sends shivers down even the most hardened investigators' spines. Decades have passed, yet the Miyazawa family's case remains unsolved, a chilling reminder that even with the most advanced forensics and globalized intelligence networks, some killers still vanish into the night, leaving behind only blood silence and questions. The Flannan Isles Lighthouse, mystery vanishing keepers in a stormless sea. Off the western coast of Scotland lies the remote Flannan Isles, a rugged, wind-beaten cluster of rocks, notorious among sailors for their isolation and treacherous surroundings. But in December 1900, these islands became the setting of one of the most baffling maritime mysteries in British history, the inexplicable disappearance of 3 lighthouse keepers. What makes the case so haunting isn't just that they vanished without a trace, but that everything they left behind suggested they had every intention of returning. The Flannan Isles Lighthouse had been manned by a rotating crew of 3 men, Thomas Marshall, James Ducat, and Donald MacArthur. On December 26, 1900, a relief vessel arrived to bring supplies and replace one of the men. But what greeted the arriving party was eerie silence. No one came to meet them. No flag was flying. The lighthouse was locked. And when the door was forced open, the inside was empty but strangely undisturbed. The clocks had stopped. A meal had been partially prepared but not eaten. 2 sets of oilskins, the heavy coats worn for protection against the harsh weather, were missing. But the 3rd set remained, implying that one man had left in a hurry without even taking proper gear. More disturbingly, the lighthouse's logbook described strange events in the days before their disappearance, fierce winds, unusual tension among the men, and cryptic entries suggesting fear and unease. The final entry, dated December 15th, ominously read, "Storm ended. Sea calm. God is over all." But no storms were recorded in the region around that time. The weather had been relatively mild. So what could have compelled three experienced keepers to vanish without signaling for help? One of the most plausible theories is that a freak wave swept them into the sea. Perhaps two of the men went to secure equipment during a sudden swell, and when they were taken by the ocean, the third ran out without his coat to help, only to be taken as well. This theory aligns with the missing oilskins and storm damage found near the landing platform. But skeptics point out that the sea was calm at the time and the keepers would have known how to secure themselves in rough weather. Others suggest darker possibilities. Some propose a murder-suicide scenario, a descent into madness from isolation and cabin fever. Yet all three men were known to be stable and experienced. Another theory involves foreign spies or abduction, though there's no evidence to support such claims. Superstitious locals whispered of sea monsters or otherworldly forces, particularly since the Flannan Isles had long held a mystical reputation in Celtic folklore. The case's enduring mystery lies in its contradictions, signs of calm routine juxtaposed with sudden abandonment. No bodies were ever recovered, no distress signals sent. The lighthouse, a beacon meant to ensure safety and visibility, became the epicenter of an event defined by disappearance and darkness. The Flannan Isles lighthouse mystery has inspired poems, songs, books, and documentaries. The idea of three men vanishing from a desolate rock in the sea, leaving behind a perfectly orderly scene and a trail of unanswered questions, continues to captivate the imagination. Whether claimed by the sea, undone by madness, or swallowed by something stranger, the keeper's fate remains unknown, etched in maritime legend and forever flashing like the light they once tended. The Pollock twins, reincarnation, or a coincidence, too strange to ignore. The Pollock twins case is one of the most famous and baffling alleged examples of reincarnation in modern history. It centers on two young girls from Hexham, England, who appeared to remember a life they had never lived. While skeptics label it coincidence or subconscious influence, the depth and specificity of the twins' memories have continued to intrigue researchers, particularly those studying the survival of consciousness after death. In 1957, a tragedy struck the Pollock family. Two sisters, Joanna, 11, and Jacqueline, 6, were killed in a car accident while walking to church. Their parents, John and Florence Pollock, were devastated. John, in particular, had long been interested in the idea of reincarnation, and despite his grief, he clung to the belief that his daughters would somehow return to him. The following year, Florence gave birth to twin girls Gillian and Jennifer. From the beginning, there were unusual signs. Though they were identical twins, Jennifer had birthmarks in the exact places Jacqueline had them. As the girls grew older, their behaviors and preferences uncannily mirrored those of their deceased sisters. Gillian seemed to favor toys and games Joanna had liked, while Jennifer became attached to items that had belonged to Jacqueline without ever being told about them. For instance, they asked for the same toys by name that their parents had kept in storage in recognized places they had never been. One incident particularly disturbed their parents. While walking through Hexham, the twins pointed out landmarks they had never visited, including the school the older girls had attended and the playground where they used to play. They also exhibited an inexplicable fear of cars often clutching each other in terror when one approached. On more than one occasion, they would play a disturbing game where one girl lay on the ground pretending to be dead, while the other reenacted the accident. Their parents had never described the circumstances of the tragedy to them. Psychologist Dr. Ian Stevenson, a well-known researcher of reincarnation, studied the case in detail. He noted that, while environmental influences could not be entirely ruled out, the sheer volume and accuracy of the twins' knowledge about their sisters' lives went far beyond what could be expected from suggestion or overheard conversations. He documented the Pollock case as one of the strongest examples of reincarnation-type memories in Western society. However, the story grows more enigmatic as the twins age. By the time they were around 5, the memories seemed to fade. The girls eventually grew up with no conscious recollection of the previous lives they once spoke of so vividly. This fading of memory aligns with other cases of children who claim to remember past lives. Usually such memories dissipate around the age of 7. Skeptics argue that the parents, especially John, may have unconsciously influenced the girls' beliefs and behavior. After all, they were grieving deeply and held a firm belief in reincarnation. Critics also point out that memory is malleable, especially in young children, and that coincidences often feel more meaningful than they are. Still, the Pollock twins remain a mystery. Whether viewed as a compelling psychological case, a lesson in grief and projection, or evidence of a soul's journey across lifetimes, their story continues to provoke wonder and debate. It invites one to question the nature of identity, the possibility of life beyond death, and the strange patterns that sometimes emerge when we least expect them. The Isdal woman, a burned body, coded notes, and an unbreakable mystery. In November 1970, hikers in Norway's Isdalen Valley, known ominously as Death Valley by locals, stumbled upon the partially charred body of a woman lying on a remote slope. Her hands were curled up in front of her chest, as if trying to protect herself from the flames. Nearby were burned personal belongings stripped of any identifying marks. Labels removed from clothing, prescription bottles, scratched clean, and even a suitcase found later containing wigs and cryptic notes written in code. More than 50 years later, no one knows who she was, where she came from, or how she died. The Isdal woman remains one of the most unsettling unsolved mysteries in modern European history. Initial investigations only deepened the mystery. The autopsy revealed she had died from a combination of carbon monoxide poisoning and sleeping pills with bruises on her neck, suggesting she might have been struck. Traces of petrol were found on her body, and her fingerprints had been sanded off, an act that speaks to a deliberate effort to erase identity. Authorities were baffled. The trail quickly grew strange. Police discovered 2 suitcases at Bergen railway station traced back to the woman. Inside were not only wigs and eyeglasses with non-prescription lenses, but also a notebook containing what appeared to be coded entries, later believed to be a sophisticated system of dates, locations, and movements. The woman had checked into several hotels under different aliases in the weeks prior, often changing her appearance and using fake passports from Belgium and other countries. Witnesses described her as beautiful, elegant, and always alone. Sometimes she claimed to be a traveling antiques dealer, other times a representative for fashion brands. For decades, speculation has swirled. One of the most enduring theories is that she was a spy. The Cold War was at its peak, and Norway was strategically important due to its proximity to the Soviet Union and NATO interests. The woman's strange movements, use of disguises, and the coded notebook all aligned disturbingly well with known espionage tactics. She had also visited places near military testing facilities. Some even theorized she was part of an intelligence operation gone wrong. But if she was a spy, whose side was she on, and why kill her so gruesomely, only to leave the body where it would certainly be found? Or was the scene meant to look like a suicide, a message perhaps, or a warning to others? Others propose more mundane explanations like mental illness or involvement in criminal activity. Some investigators have pointed out that the sleeping pills found in her system could suggest suicide, though the burns and injuries argue against it. Additionally, her dental records revealed extensive and expensive dental work, possibly done in South America, further complicating her origins. Despite renewed interest in recent years, especially after the case gained international attention through podcasts and documentaries, her identity remains unknown. In 2016, Norwegian police reopened the case using modern forensic techniques. Isotope analysis of her teeth suggested she had likely grown up in Central Europe, possibly Germany or France. But even this revelation has not been enough to crack the case. No missing person reports have matched her description. No family has come forward. She remains unclaimed, unnamed, and unsettling. The Isdal woman's story has endured for over 5 decades, not just because it is unsolved, but because it touches something primal, the fear that a person can live a complex, perhaps even vital life, and still vanish without a trace. It forces us to confront how fragile identity can be and how easy it is in the end to disappear. The Devil's Footprints, a trail of hooves in the snow, no man could explain. On the morning of February the 9th of 1855, residents of Devon, England awoke to a strange and terrifying sight. A fresh blanket of snow had fallen overnight, but so had something else. A single line of hoof-like prints stretched unbroken across the countryside, reportedly covering over 100 miles in total. They marched in perfect formation across rooftops, through walls, up sides of houses, across frozen rivers, and over high fences. Even stranger, the prints appeared to belong to a cloven-footed creature eerily reminiscent of the biblical devil. Thus was born one of the most chilling unsolved mysteries of the 19th century, the Devil's Footprints. Witnesses described the tracks as being about 4 inches long, spaced about 8 to 16 inches apart, and set in a straight line as if made by something walking on 2 legs rather than 4. This added to the unsettling nature of the phenomenon, as did the sheer distance the tracks covered without ever breaking stride. They appeared to pass through obstacles that no living creature, especially not one making footprints in the snow, should be able to traverse. Local newspapers ran headlines filled with panic and speculation. Church leaders warned of a demonic presence. Some townsfolk refused to leave their homes after dark, convinced that the devil himself had visited the English countryside. Theories quickly emerged, ranging from escaped kangaroos, to experimental balloons, dragging metal hoops behind them, none of which convincingly accounted for the eerie consistency or extensive path of the tracks. Naturalists attempted to provide rational explanations. Some proposed that badgers, mice, or hopping rodents might have created the tracks, but critics pointed out that no known animal moved with such consistent bipedal spacing, nor could they climb walls or cross rooftops in such a linear pattern. Furthermore, the fact that the footprints crossed rivers without breaking stride suggested either a creature that could walk on water or something beyond the physical realm. Skeptics have also suggested weather phenomena, such as a rare combination of melting and freezing patterns that might distort animal tracks into hoof-like shapes. But that theory collapses under the detail and uniformity of the prints, not to mention their vast geographic spread in just one night. One of the most unsettling elements is how many witnesses independently reported the same phenomenon across multiple villages and towns. From Exmouth to Totnes to Dawlish, the tracks were seen and documented. They were not isolated to a single area, which makes prank or hoax theories difficult to accept given the technology and transportation of the time. Modern investigators remain baffled. Some paranormal researchers see the event as one of the earliest mass-recorded unexplained occurrences in modern times, preceding even the spiritualist movements that surged later in the century. Others point to the devil's footprints as a form of cultural mass hysteria, a fear projected onto a shared but misunderstood natural event. Regardless of origin, the devil's footprints have earned a permanent place in the lore of the strange. The incident taps into a deep archetypal fear that something otherworldly can pass through our everyday world, leaving behind signs we don't understand and can't explain. More than 150 years later, the tracks remain a chilling reminder that even in the age of reason, there are still footprints in the snow we cannot follow. The Lead Masks case. 2 dead men, a hilltop, and a note about spirits. On August 20th, 1966, a young boy flying a kite on Vintem Hill in Niterói, Brazil stumbled upon a harrowing scene, the bodies of 2 men lying side by side, partially covered by leaves and dressed in formal suits with raincoats draped over them. Most disturbingly, each wore a homemade lead mask covering the eyes, like a blindfold fashioned from sheet metal. Nearby were empty water bottles, 2 wet towels, and a cryptic handwritten note that read, 1630 be at the specified location. 1830 ingest capsules after effect protect metals await signal mask. The chilling combination of dead men coded messages and unexplained elements birthed one of the most perplexing mysteries in Brazilian history, the Lead Masks case. The 2 men were identified as Manuel Pereira da Cruz and Miguel José Viana, both local electronics technicians from the nearby town of Campos dos Goitacazes. Their journey to Niterói was planned but oddly secretive. Witnesses reported them purchasing water and raincoats and asking for a receipt for a battery, possibly as a timestamp to verify their presence at a specific location. They told family members they were going on a work trip to buy materials, but clearly their journey had an entirely different purpose. The autopsy provided little insight. The bodies showed no signs of violence or trauma. Due to the significant delay between discovery and examination, the internal organs had deteriorated too much to test for poison or drugs conclusively. Thus, the cause of death remains unknown. But the most compelling question remains, what were these 2 men doing on a hilltop with lead masks, ingesting capsules and waiting for a signal? The note is the key to the entire mystery. Written in an awkward, fragmented style, it suggests a ritualistic or experimental sequence, perhaps involving psychedelics or contact with otherworldly entities. Some researchers believe the men were attempting a form of spiritual communication, possibly with extraterrestrials or higher dimensional beings. Lead masks are not standard attire, but they do appear in fringe metaphysical theories as protection from radiation, intense light, or spiritual energy. Adding to the enigma, friends and colleagues confirmed the 2 men were deeply interested in esotericism and spiritual science. They had previously built devices to detect spirits and attended meetings with groups experimenting with psychic communication and transcendental experiences. Some speculate they were following instructions given to them in seances or through automatic writing. In their view, they may have been attempting to reach a higher state of consciousness or even expecting to be taken by aliens. Skeptics have proposed alternative explanations. Perhaps they were misled by a con artist posing as a medium. Perhaps they accidentally overdosed while following misguided steps in a drug-fueled ritual. Others wonder if they were part of an underground cult or were conducting an experiment gone wrong. But even these more grounded theories fail to explain the meticulous planning, the cryptic note, and the eerie lack of panic in the scene. Despite multiple investigations, the Brazilian police eventually closed the case without resolution. No leads, no conclusive cause of death, no explanation for the masks or the instructions. Over time, the lead masks case has become the subject of documentaries, podcasts, and endless internet speculation. What makes this story so haunting is not just its strangeness, but its plausibility. These weren't mysterious strangers. They were regular men, fathers, and workers who walked calmly into a bizarre and fatal experience. Whether they were seekers of enlightenment or victims of delusion, their final moments remain shrouded in lead silence and questions that continue to echo on that lonely hill. The Green Children of Woolpit, strange visitors from another world, sometime in the 12th century in the quiet English village of Woolpit in Suffolk. Something or someone emerged from legend into recorded history. According to medieval chronicles, 2 young children were discovered near the edge of a deep pit used for trapping wolves. They appeared to be siblings, a boy and a girl, and what struck the villagers immediately was their skin. It was green. Not slightly pale, not sickly, but unmistakably green. Thus began the mystery of the Green Children of Woolpit, a story that has fascinated folklorists, historians, and UFO theorists for centuries. The children were dressed in unfamiliar clothing made of strange material and spoke no known language. They refused all food until someone offered them raw, broad beans, which they devoured. Over time, they began to eat other types of food and slowly lost their green hue. Tragically, the boy became ill and died not long after their discovery, but the girl survived. As she learned English, she told the villagers a story that only deepened the mystery. She claimed she and her brother came from a place called St. Martin's Land, a subterranean world where everything was green, including the people. According to her account, they were tending their father's flocks when they heard a loud sound and suddenly found themselves in a strange place, filled with bright light, the surface world. They had become disoriented and were then found by the villagers near the wolf pit. The girl eventually integrated into society, took the name Agnes, and was said to have married a local man. The first accounts of this story appear in 2 medieval chronicles, William of Newburgh's Historia Rerum Anglicarum and Ralph of Coggeshall's Chronicon Anglicanum. Both sources provide a similar narrative, though with slight differences. Despite their religious and moralistic tones, the chroniclers reported the incident as a genuine, if perplexing, occurrence. This has left researchers wondering, was the story allegorical, symbolic, or a distorted memory of a real event? Several theories have been put forward. One naturalistic explanation suggests that the children were Flemish immigrants who had become lost after their parents were killed during a local conflict. Their unfamiliar language could have been Flemish, and their green hue might have resulted from malnutrition, a condition known as chlorosis. Over time, improved diet could have restored normal coloration, explaining the girl's eventual change in appearance. Yet others aren't so quick to dismiss the fantastic. Some propose that the children came from another dimension or a parallel world, a theory bolstered by the girl's description of perpetual twilight and an underground society. UFO enthusiasts have even suggested that the children were aliens or hybrids who accidentally arrived on Earth through a wormhole or portal. Though far-fetched, this theory finds traction in the story's supernatural tone and its eerie parallels with modern missing time and abduction phenomena. Regardless of interpretation, the story refuses to fade. The green children of Woolpit continue to capture the human imagination because they embody one of our most persistent longings. The idea that there is something just beyond our world, a hidden reality brushing up against ours. Whether the children were refugees, fae folk, or visitors from another realm, they walked out of the unknown into the recorded world, leaving behind a puzzle that even centuries later defies a definitive answer. The green children of Woolpit's strange visitors from another world. Sometime during the 12th century, in the quiet village of Woolpit, Suffolk, England, a story emerged so strange it continues to baffle historians, folklorists, and paranormal researchers to this day. According to chroniclers of the time, villagers discovered two children, brother and sister, near a wolf trap or wool pit on the edge of town. What made the children remarkable was not just their unfamiliar clothing or the fact that they spoke an unknown language. Their skin reportedly was green. The children were taken in by a local landowner, Sir Richard de Calne. They were frightened, disoriented, and refused to eat any food except raw, broad beans. Eventually, the boy grew sick and died, but the girl began to adapt. She learned English, her green hue faded, and she began to share her story. She claimed she and her brother came from a place called Saint-Ouen, Martin's Land, a subterranean world where the sun never shone and everything was bathed in a twilight green. According to her, they had been tending their father's herd when they heard a strange sound, like bells, and suddenly found themselves in Woolpit. Two primary accounts exist of the incident, one from Ralph of Coggeshall and another from William of Newburgh, both respected chroniclers of the era. While the details vary slightly, both tell of the children's green skin, their foreign speech, and their eventual adaptation to English culture. The girl reportedly grew into adulthood and married a local man, living out her days in the community, though forever marked by the mystery of her origin. Theories abound. Some suggest the children were Flemish immigrants, orphaned and lost, after a battle with their green tint caused by malnutrition or a dietary disorder like chlorosis. This would explain their foreign language and initial confusion. Others interpret the story as a garbled memory of a true event wrapped in layers of folklore over centuries. The dietary aversion, their underground origin, and their green skin may all be metaphorical or misremembered. But not everyone is satisfied with earthly explanations. Some modern interpretations see the tale as an early encounter with extraterrestrial beings or interdimensional travelers. The children's underground homeland, constant twilight, and strange transition into our world fit surprisingly well with modern descriptions of parallel dimensions or hidden civilizations. Could Woolpit have been the site of a rare interdimensional breach? There's also the symbolic layer. In medieval lore, green is often associated with otherness, fairies, spirits, and beings from beyond the veil. The tale of the green children may represent the archetypal encounter with the unknown, a blending of myth and reality, meant to express deeper truths about fear, acceptance, and the limits of our world. Whether the children were real, imagined, or symbolic, the villagers' response to them speaks volumes about medieval values, curiosity, caution, and a longing to understand what lies beyond. To this day, Woolpit embraces its mystery. Visitors can find references to the green children in local signs and folklore tours. But no one, not even centuries of scholars and skeptics, has been able to decisively explain the origin of the green children. Their story endures as a haunting reminder that not all who walk among us are from here, and not every child of this earth is born under the sun. The Pollock twins' reincarnation, proof or coincidence? In 1957, in the small town of Hexham, England, a tragic accident shook the lives of the Pollock family. Two sisters, Joanna, 11, and Jacqueline, 6, were killed in a car accident while walking to church. The grief-stricken parents, John and Florence Pollock, were devastated. But their story took an extraordinary turn a year later, when Florence gave birth to twin girls Jennifer and Gillian on October 4th, 1958. What followed has become one of the most compelling modern cases cited as possible evidence for reincarnation. From infancy, the twins displayed behaviors and preferences eerily similar to their deceased sisters. Jennifer had a birthmark on her waist identical to one Jacqueline had, as well as a mark on her forehead in the same spot as a scar Jacqueline carried. Gillian, the older of the twins, took on characteristics resembling Joanna, the older of the deceased sisters. Even more uncanny were the twins' knowledge of places they had never been and toys they had never seen until they recognized them. When the twins were around 4 years old, the family moved back to Hexham. There, the girls began pointing out locations that had relevance to Joanna and Jacqueline's lives, including their old school and playground. They even displayed an unexplained fear of cars, often becoming anxious when vehicles approached them in the street. This fear was particularly intense despite having no direct traumatic experience of their own. According to their parents, the twins would exclaim things like, "The car, it's coming to get us." Their parents, especially John, were convinced the twins were the reincarnations of their deceased daughters. John had always believed in reincarnation and saw in his daughter's behavior and physical traits strong evidence for this belief. Florence, initially skeptical, gradually began to reconsider her views as the twins continued to show inexplicable familiarity with details only the deceased children would have known. Dr. Ian Stevenson, a respected psychiatrist at the University of Virginia, who studied thousands of reincarnation cases, documented the Pollock twins' case extensively. He found it compelling not only because of the behavioral and physical parallels, but also because the twins appeared to forget their past life memories as they grew older, consistent with patterns he observed in other alleged reincarnation cases. Of course, skeptics offer more grounded explanations. They argue that the twins may have unconsciously picked up on stories, photographs, and emotional cues from their grieving parents, especially if the atmosphere in the household remained saturated with memories of the lost girls. The similarities could be the result of projection, confirmation bias, or even coincidence. After all, siblings often share features and personalities. Yet even skeptics acknowledged the strangeness of the case. The precise birthmarks, the deep-seated fears, and the early recognition of places and objects remain difficult to explain entirely through psychology or chance. The Pollock twins case has thus persisted for decades as a unique example at the intersection of family trauma mystery and metaphysical inquiry. Whether you see it as proof of reincarnation or the mind's incredible ability to construct reality from grief and love, the story of the Pollock twins continues to captivate. It asks us to reconsider the boundaries of identity, the possibility of life beyond death, and whether souls, however we define them, can truly find their way back home. The Man from Torrid, Interdimensional Traveler, or Elaborate Hoax. In the summer of 1954, a seemingly ordinary man arrived at Tokyo's Haneda Airport, clutching a passport from a country that did not and still does not exist. Dressed in a business suit, fluent in several languages and carrying currency from various nations, the man claimed he was from a nation called Taured. When immigration officials showed him a map and pointed to Andorra, the closest location to where he said Taured was, he appeared confused and insulted. He insisted Taured had existed for over 1,000 years and had no idea why officials were treating him as if he were delusional. This began what would become one of the most enduring stories of supposed interdimensional travel. The man's passport appeared legitimate with visas and stamps corroborating extensive international travel, including previous visits to Japan. His checks and driver's license also bore the name of Taured. Japanese authorities, baffled and suspicious of espionage, detained him in a hotel room under guard while they investigated. But the next morning, the man had vanished along with all his documents. There was no sign of escape, no evidence of a break-in or tampering with the locked room. He was simply gone. Over the years, the legend of the Man from Taured has morphed into something of an urban myth. It's often cited by believers in parallel universes as compelling anecdotal evidence that our world is just one of many. According to these theories, the man was a traveler from an alternate Earth where Taured exists, and due to some quantum or dimensional glitch, he was mistakenly deposited in our reality. Others suggest he may have briefly crossed into our dimension and was later pulled back into his own, either by natural forces or as part of some secretive operation. Skeptics, however, are quick to point out that no official government record of this incident exists. They argue that the story likely originated from a blend of misreported events, possibly even fabricated entirely by imaginative retellings over time. There's no photographic evidence, no surviving documents, and no verifiable names tied to the event. Some speculate the tale may have been inspired by real Cold War-era detainments of suspicious travelers, with the details gradually transformed through repeated storytelling and the rise of Internet mystery culture. Yet the lack of documentation hasn't stopped the story from capturing imaginations. It taps into a primal question: what if reality isn't fixed? What if just beyond the veil of what we know, there are other versions of our world with different borders, languages, histories, and destinies? The Man from Taured represents the possibility that the universe or multiverse is far stranger than we believe, that someone might slip through the cracks of one world into another and be forced to face the unsettling realization that everything they've ever known doesn't exist here. Whether the man was a time traveler, a victim of a bureaucratic mix-up, a hoaxer, or a genuine anomaly from a parallel dimension, his story refuses to die. It exists in that fertile twilight between belief and disbelief, between what we know and what we fear we may never fully understand. And in that space, much like Todd itself, possibility lingers. The Belmez faces spirits in the cement or pareidolia at work. In the quiet Spanish village of Belmez de la Moraleda, a bizarre phenomenon erupted in 1971 that would captivate paranormal investigators and skeptics alike. It began when Maria Gomez Camara noticed a strange face forming on the concrete kitchen floor of her home. Not a smudge or stain, but a clearly human-like visage that seemed to emerge from within the cement itself. Disturbed, her family attempted to remove the image. They scrubbed it, even destroyed the section of flooring, but the face returned. Then others began to appear, sometimes changing expressions, vanishing and re-emerging with subtle differences. Thus began the mystery of the Belmez faces, faces said to be manifestations of spirits trapped in the home. The Gomez family's house quickly became a sensation. Word spread, and soon curious neighbors, journalists and researchers flooded to the scene. The faces appeared not just in the kitchen but in other rooms, sometimes full portraits, sometimes fragmented features embedded in the floor and walls. They didn't seem to be painted, carved, or etched. When samples of the floor were analyzed, scientists could not conclusively explain how the faces formed. Skeptics claimed it was a hoax, a form of chemical manipulation involving acids or pigments. Yet multiple tests, including photographic and chemical analysis, were inconclusive. Some samples were said to show no trace of tampering, while others were too contaminated to offer clarity. Over time, various theories surfaced. Some believed the house had been built on an old cemetery, its foundations saturated with tragic history and unrestful spirits. A local excavation revealed skeletal remains beneath the home, adding to the belief that the faces were linked to the dead buried below. Others suggested the images were projections of Maria's psychic abilities, manifestations of psychokinesis, or telepathic imprints possibly unconsciously created. This theory, popular among parapsychologists, held that human emotion and trauma can somehow leave a psychic residue on physical space, particularly in emotionally charged environments. Yet many remain skeptical. Pareidolia, a psychological phenomenon where the brain perceives familiar patterns like faces in random visual data, is often cited as an explanation. According to this view, the floor marks may have been random discolorations that viewers imposed meaning upon. The suggestion of a face triggers the mind's pattern recognition instincts, causing people to see emotion, personality, and expression where none exists. Combine this with media hype, local superstition, and wishful thinking, and you have a recipe for a long-lasting mystery. Despite these rational explanations, the Belmez faces continue to inspire debate. They have appeared intermittently for decades, and the home is now considered one of the most haunted places in Spain. Even after Maria's death in 2004, new faces were reported to emerge. Whether a grand hoax, a psychological illusion, or something genuinely paranormal, the story persists because it taps into something universal, the uneasy idea that the dead may not be gone, that they may linger just beneath the surface, trying to be seen. In the end, the Belmez faces may be less about proof and more about the stories we tell when confronted with the unexplained. They offer a mirror not just of human faces, but of our desire to believe that there is more to this world than what meets the eye. Shadow people. Interdimensional entities or sleep paralysis Hallucinations. The phenomenon of shadow people is one of the most chilling and widely reported in the realm of the paranormal. These dark, human-like figures, often described as blacker than black without discernible features and typically seen out of the corner of one's eye, have been reported for centuries across cultures. Some witnesses describe them as fleeting silhouettes that vanish upon direct gaze. Others report more terrifying encounters, feeling watched, paralyzed, or even physically harmed. The most infamous type is the Hat Man, a tall, looming figure wearing what appears to be a fedora, or wide-brimmed hat, often exuding an intense feeling of dread. For many, these apparitions appear during sleep paralysis, a state in which a person is conscious but unable to move, often accompanied by hallucinations and a sense of an ominous presence in the room. This has led many scientists to classify shadow people as products of the brain in a confused and fearful state. Neurologically, sleep paralysis is understood as a disconnection between the brain's motor control and consciousness, often occurring during REM sleep. During this vulnerable period, the mind may project terrifying images as it struggles to make sense of waking in an immobile body shadow, people being a common archetype of this mental chaos. However, what complicates the purely scientific explanation is the consistency of shadow people sightings across demographics, geographies, and time periods. People who have never heard of the phenomenon report nearly identical experiences, the same types of figures, the same overwhelming dread, and sometimes even the same behaviors, such as standing at the foot of the bed or moving quickly across a hallway. This consistency has led some to speculate that these entities might not be hallucinations at all, but rather real beings, possibly interdimensional entities that interact with our world during altered states of consciousness. In paranormal circles, shadow people are sometimes viewed as energy parasites feeding on fear and negative emotion. Others believe they may be guardians, watchers, or beings from a parallel dimension accidentally bleeding into our reality. Some spiritual traditions describe similar figures as spirits of the restless dead or even manifestations of demonic forces. There are also theories tying shadow people to UFO phenomena, suggesting they may be connected to extraterrestrials or their surveillance of human consciousness. One of the more unsettling aspects of shadow people encounters is their emotional effect. Witnesses often report an almost suffocating feeling of terror, one that is disproportionate to simply seeing a dark silhouette. The fear seems to radiate from the entities themselves, described not just as emotion, but as an invading force. Some people, particularly children, report years of visitations, always accompanied by the same dread and inability to resist or escape. Others claim to have interacted with them during lucid dreams or astral projections. Ultimately, shadow people occupy a disturbing space between science and superstition. The sleep paralysis explanation is compelling, but it doesn't account for sightings when the person is fully awake and mobile. Nor does it explain the widespread similarities in reports. Whether they are psychological constructs, spiritual entities, or travelers from another dimension, shadow people challenge our understanding of what is real, what is imagined, and what might exist just beyond the veil of human perception. The Pollock twins, reincarnation, proof or grief-fueled projection. In the quiet town of Hexham, England, the 1950s, witnessed a case that would ignite one of the most controversial debates in the history of reincarnation research. The story centers on the Pollock family, John and Florence, and their daughters, Joanna and Jacqueline. In May 1957, tragedy struck when the two young girls, aged 11 and 6, were killed in a car accident while walking to church. The family was devastated, and Florence especially fell into deep grief. But a year later, Florence gave birth to twin girls Jennifer and Gillian, and it was their arrival that launched the extraordinary tale now known as the Pollock twins case. From the very beginning, the twins began displaying behaviors and preferences eerily reminiscent of their deceased sisters. Despite being raised in a different environment with no access to the old belongings or memories they gravitated toward, the same toys demonstrated similar phobias and even mimicked unique gestures, habits, and mannerisms of Joanna and Jacqueline. Jennifer, the younger of the two, bore a peculiar birthmark on her forehead in the exact spot where Jacqueline had a visible scar from a prior injury. As they grew older, the twins recalled events from their sisters' lives with uncanny detail, mentioning specific locations in Hexham they had never visited, identifying family friends by name, and even describing the accident that had claimed Joanna and Jacqueline's lives. This phenomenon astonished their parents, particularly John Pollock, who had always believed in reincarnation. Florence, initially skeptical and deeply rooted in Catholic faith, gradually found herself drawn into the mystery as the evidence mounted. By the time the twins were 4, they seemed to enter a phase of intense memory recall, describing not only physical details, but also emotional experiences linked to the deceased siblings. However, as they approached the age of 7, the same age at which many reincarnation researchers believe past life memories begin to fade, the vivid recollections began to diminish. The girls eventually led normal lives with no lingering memory of being someone else. Dr. Ian Stevenson, a pioneer in reincarnation studies at the University of Virginia, extensively investigated the Pollock twins case. He included it in his broader research on children who claim to remember past lives, citing it as one of the most compelling Western examples of possible reincarnation. Stevenson was particularly intrigued by the behavioral patterns and physical similarities, including the matching birthmarks, which he believed could not be easily dismissed as coincidence. However, critics argue that the case is far from conclusive. Skeptics suggest that the twins' behavior may have been influenced consciously or unconsciously by their grieving parents. Children are highly impressionable, and it's possible that John and Florence, knowingly or not, shaped the twins' sense of identity through subtle cues, environment, or wishful thinking. The idea that Jennifer and Gillian could have been absorbing stories, photos, or emotions from their parents and reflecting them back in the form of apparent past life memories is seen by some as more plausible than true reincarnation. Yet even with these counter-arguments, the Pollock twins continue to captivate believers and skeptics alike. Their story is powerful because it touches on a universal question: what happens after death? Whether seen as evidence of the soul's return or a poignant example of how grief reshapes perception and memory. The Pollock twins challenge our understanding of identity consciousness and the boundaries between life and death. The Devil's Footprints, Demonic Visit, or Meteorological Mystery. On a cold February morning in 1855, the townspeople of Devon, England awoke to find something bizarre and unsettling, a long continuous trail of hoof-like prints etched into the snow. These footprints, later dubbed the Devil's Footprints, stretched for nearly 100 miles, across the countryside, traversing fields, walls, rivers, and even rooftops, as if some unnatural creature had marched across the landscape overnight. What made the phenomenon even more chilling was the uniformity of the prints' cloven-hoofed marks, spaced approximately 8 inches apart, often appearing in straight lines as if made with mechanical precision. Local clergy and residents were horrified, believing the prints to be evidence of Satan himself wandering through Devon. Churches reported panicked congregants, and rumors spread like wildfire that this was a sign of judgment or a dark spiritual warning. Given the deeply religious context of Victorian-era England, the devil was not a metaphor, but a real, looming presence in the minds of many. For them, hoof prints in the snow, especially those that appeared to defy natural movement by crossing rooftops and narrow walls, could only signify demonic activity. However, as the decades passed, other explanations emerged, though none entirely satisfying. Some scientists proposed that hopping rodents such as kangaroo rats or badgers could have created the prints, though this was quickly dismissed due to the scale and unusual gait. Others suggested that a balloon dragging a tether might have stamped the marks, but this idea failed to account for the clear hoof-like shapes and the terrain's complexity. There were even theories about a freak atmospheric event where melting snow caused unique patterns that only resembled prints, but this could not explain the consistent spacing and apparent directionality. The most plausible scientific explanation to date is that a variety of animals, perhaps foxes, deer, or even escaped exotic pets, created the tracks during the night, and that weather conditions made them appear more mysterious. Snowfall can distort footprints, making small tracks appear larger or changing their shape. However, this doesn't explain how the prints crossed rivers and walls in straight, unbroken lines. Nor does it satisfy reports that they entered enclosed gardens with no sign of entry or exit. The enduring mystery of the devil's footprints lies in the sheer volume and precision of the tracks. Eyewitness accounts collected in the weeks that followed all tell of something that seemed methodical, deliberate, and inexplicable. For paranormal researchers, this consistency elevates the event beyond a simple weather anomaly or animal behavior. Some modern occultists even speculate that the event marked a thin place, a moment when the boundaries between dimensions weakened, allowing something otherworldly to briefly interact with our world. The tale has since become part of English folklore, inspiring books, radio plays, and documentaries. It serves as a cautionary tale about jumping to supernatural conclusions in the face of unexplained events, but it also remains a compelling challenge to our scientific assumptions. Over 150 years later, no definitive answer has been found. Whether it was a prank, a misunderstood meteorological phenomenon, or something far darker, the devil's footprints continue to haunt the imagination, an unsolved riddle carved into the snow defying both nature and reason. When the unexplainable whispers back across time, cultures, and continents, humanity has encountered the inexplicable. Ghost ships on icy waters, footprints that vanish into walls. Children who remember lives they shouldn't. Each tale challenges the rigid lines we draw between myth and reality, between the material and the spiritual. In an age where science reigns supreme, these stories serve as gentle but persistent echoes of something deeper, something ancient and unresolved. They are not mere curiosities or footnotes in history, they are invitations. Each unexplained event holds up a mirror not just to the unknown, but to us. They reflect our deepest fears and hopes, our longing for connection, meaning, and continuity beyond the fragile shell of physical life. Why do we return again and again to stories of reincarnation, spectral sightings, or visitors from beyond the stars? Because at some level, we all feel that life is not merely what we can measure. The soul suspects more. Perhaps that is the true purpose of these mysteries, not to offer tidy answers, but to awaken the sacred questions we have forgotten how to ask. They remind us that our modern knowledge is a flickering candle in a vast cosmic night. And in that darkness, something may be watching, waiting, or whispering truths too complex for words. It is tempting to dismiss such phenomena as psychological projections, hoaxes, or misunderstandings. But to do so is to silence a very old voice, one that has always lived at the threshold of the human experience. The voice that tells us we are not alone, that there is more, that perhaps death is not an end but a veil, that perhaps consciousness is not confined to the skull but is a field we move through like fish through unseen currents. And maybe, just maybe, the tales we call paranormal are not outliers, but breadcrumbs. Breadcrumbs leading back to a forgotten part of ourselves. So whether you believe in reincarnation, ghosts, interdimensional entities, or simply the power of story, know this mystery is medicine. It humbles the mind, opens the heart, and re-enchants the world. It reminds us that the universe is not a cold machine, but a living question mark, a place where miracles still hide in plain sight, if only we dare to look with wonder. Keep questioning, keep listening, and when the unexplainable whispers, don't be too quick to turn away.